The Ghost of a Hand by J. Sheridan Le Fanu, narrated by Tony Walker. Miss Rebecca Chattersworth, in a letter dated late in the autumn of 1753, gives a minute and curious relation of occurrences in the tiled house, which it is plain, although at starting she protests against all such fooleries, she has heard with a peculiar sort of particularity. I was for printing the entire letter, which is really very singular as well as characteristic, but my publisher meets me with his veto, and I believe he is right. The worthy old lady's letter is perhaps too long, and I must rest content with a few hungry notes of its tenor. That year, and somewhere about the 24th of October, there broke out a strange dispute between Mr. Alderman Harper of High Street, Dublin, and my Lord Castle Mallard, who, in virtue of his cousinship to the young heir's mother, had undertaken for him the management of the tiny estate on which the tiled, or tiled with a Y house, for I find it spelled both ways, stood. This Alderman Harper had agreed for a lease of the house for his daughter, who was married to a gentleman named Prosser. He furnished it and put up hangings and otherwise went to considerable expense. Mr. and Mrs. Prosser came there sometime in June, and, after having parted with a good many servants in the interval, she made up her mind that she could not live in the house, and her father waited on Lord Castle Mallard and told him plainly that he would not take out the lease, because the house was subjected to annoyances which he could not explain. In plain terms, he said it was haunted, and that no servants would live there more than a few weeks, and that after what his son-in-law's family had suffered there, not only should he be excused from taking a lease of it, but that the house itself ought to be pulled down as a nuisance and the habitual haunt of something worse than human malefactors. Lord Castle Mallard filed a bill in the equity side of the Exchequer to compel Mr. Alderman Harper to perform his contract by taking out the lease, but the alderman drew an answer, supported by no less than 7 long affidavits, copies of all of which were furnished to his lordship, and with the desired effect. For rather than compel him to place them upon the file of the court, his lordship struck and consented to release him. I am sorry the case did not proceed at least far enough to place upon the files of the court the very authentic and unaccountable story which Miss Rebecca relates. The annoyances described did not begin till the end of August, when one evening Mrs. Prosser, quite alone, was sitting in the twilight at the back parlour window, which was open, looking out into the orchard, and plainly saw a hand stealthily placed upon the stone window-sill outside, as if by someone beneath the window at her right side, intending to climb up. There was nothing but the hand, which was rather short, but handsomely formed, and white and plump, laid on the edge of the window-sill. And it was not a very young hand, but one aged somewhere about 40, as she conjectured. It was only a few weeks before that the horrible robbery at Clondalkin had taken place, and the lady fancied that the hand was that of one of the miscreants, who was now about to scale the windows of the tiled house. She uttered a loud scream and an ejaculation of terror, and at the same moment the hand was quietly withdrawn. Search was made in the orchard, but there were no indications of any persons having been under the window, beneath which, ranged along the wall, stood a great column of flower-pots, which it seemed must have prevented anyone's coming within reach of it. The same night there came a hasty tapping, every now and again, at the window of the kitchen. The women grew frightened, and the servant man, taking firearms with him, opened the back door, but discovered nothing. As he shut it, however, he said, a thump came on it, and a pressure as of somebody striving to force his way in, which frightened him. And though the tapping went on upon the kitchen window panes, he made no further explorations. About 6 o'clock on the Saturday evening following, the cook, an honest, sober woman, now aged nigh 60 years, being alone in the kitchen, saw, on looking up, it is supposed, the same fat but aristocratic-looking hand, laid with its palm against the glass, as if feeling carefully for some inequality in its surface. She cried out and said something like a prayer on seeing it, but it was not withdrawn for several seconds after. After this, for a great many nights, there came at first a low and afterwards an angry rapping, as it seemed, with a set of clenched knuckles at the back door, and the servant man would not open it, but called to know who was there, and there came no answer, only a sound as if the palm of the hand was placed against it and drawn slowly from side to side with a sort of soft, groping motion. All this time, sitting in the back parlour, which for the time they used as a drawing-room, Mr. and Mrs. Prosser were disturbed by rappings at the window, sometimes very low and furtive, like a clandestine signal, and at others sudden, and so loud as to threaten the breaking of the pane. This was all at the back of the house, which looked upon the orchard, as you know, but on a Tuesday night, at about 9:30, there came precisely the same rappings at the hall door, and went on, to the great annoyance of the master and terror of his wife, at intervals for nearly 2 hours. After this, for several days and nights, they had no annoyance whatsoever, and began to think that the nuisance had expended itself. But on the night of the 13th September, Jane Easterbrook, an English maid, having gone into the pantry for the small silver bowl in which her mistress's posset was served, happening to look up at the little window of only 4 panes, observed, through an auger hole which was drilled through the window frame for the admission of a bolt to secure the shutter, a white, pudgy finger. First the tip, and then the 2 first joints introduced, and turned about this way and that, crooked against the inside, as if in search of a fastening which its owner designed to push aside. When the maid got back into the kitchen, we are told she fell into a swoon, and was all the next day very weak. Mr. Prosser, being, I've heard, a hard-headed and conceited sort of fellow, scouted the ghost, and sneered at the fears of his family. He was privately of the opinion that the whole affair was a practical joke or a fraud, and waited an opportunity of catching the rogue, flagrante delicto. He did not long keep this theory to himself, but let it out by degrees with no stint of oaths and threats, believing that some domestic traitor held the thread of the conspiracy. Indeed, it was time something were done, for not only his servants, but good Mrs. Prosser herself had grown to look unhappy and anxious. They kept at home from the hour of sunset, and would not venture about the house after nightfall, except in couples. The knocking had ceased for about a week, when one night Mrs. Prosser, being in the nursery, her husband, who was in the parlour, heard it begin, very softly, at the hall door. The air was quite still, which favoured his hearing distinctly. This was the first time there had been any disturbance at that side of the house, and the character of the summons was changed. Mr. Prosser, leaving the parlour door open, it seems, went quietly into the hall. The sound was that of beating on the outside of the stout door, softly and irregularly, with the flat of the hand. He was going to open it suddenly, but changed his mind, and went back very quietly, and on to the head of the kitchen stair, where there was a strong closet over the pantry, in which he kept his firearms, swords, and canes. Here he called his manservant, whom he believed to be honest, and with a pair of loaded pistols in his own coat pockets, and giving another pair to him, he went as lightly as he could, followed by the man, and with a stout walking cane in his hand, forward to the door. Everything went as Mr. Prosser wished. The besieger of his house, so far from taking fright at their approach, grew more impatient, and the sort of patting which had aroused his attention at first assumed the rhythm and emphasis of a series of double knocks. Mr. Prosser, angry, opened the door with his right arm across, cane in hand, looking He saw nothing, but his arm was jerked up oddly, as it might be with the hollow of a hand, and something passed under it with a kind of gentle squeeze. The servant neither saw nor felt anything, and did not know why his master looked back so hastily, cutting with his cane and shutting the door with so sudden a slam. From that time, Mr. Prosser discontinued his angry talk and swearing about it, and seemed nearly as averse from the subject as the rest of his family. He grew, in fact, very uncomfortable, feeling an inward persuasion that when in answer to the summons he had opened the hall door, he had actually given admission to the besieger. He said nothing to Mrs. Prosser, but went up earlier to his bedroom, where he read a while in his Bible and said his prayers. I hope the particular relation of this circumstance does not indicate its singularity. He lay awake for a good while, it appears, and as he supposed, about 12:15 he heard the soft palm of a hand patting on the outside of the bedroom door, and then brushed slowly along it. Up bounced Mr. Prosser, very much frightened, and locked the door, crying, "Who's there?" but receiving no answer but the same brushing sound of a soft hand drawn over the panels, which he knew only too well. In the morning, the housemaid was terrified by the impression of a hand in the dust of the little parlour table where they had been unpacking Delft and other things the day before. The print of the naked foot in the sea sand did not frighten Robinson Crusoe half so much. They were by this time all nervous, and some of them half crazed about the hand. Mr. Prosser went to examine the mark and made light of it, but as he swore afterwards, rather to quiet his servants than from any comfortable feeling about it in his own mind. However, he had them all, one by one, into the room, and made each place his or her hand palm downward on the same table, thus taking a similar impression from every person in the house, including himself and his wife. And his affidavit deposed that the formation of the hand so impressed differed altogether from those of the living inhabitants of the house, and corresponded with that of the hand seen by Mrs. Prosser and by the cook. Whoever or whatever the owner of that hand might be, they all felt this subtle demonstration to mean that it was declared he was no longer out of doors, but had established himself in the house. And now Mrs. Prosser began to be troubled with strange and horrible dreams, some of which, as set out in detail in Aunt Rebecca's long letter, are really very appalling nightmares. But one night, as Mr. Prosser closed his bedchamber door, he was struck somewhat by the utter silence of the room, there being no sound of breathing, which seemed unaccountable to him, as he knew his wife was in bed, and his ears were particularly sharp. There was a candle burning on a small table at the foot of the bed, besides the one he held in one hand, a heavy ledger connected with his father-in-law's business being under his arm. He drew the curtain at the side of the bed and saw Mrs. Prosser lying, as for a few seconds he mortally feared, dead, her face being motionless, white, and covered with a cold dew, and on the pillow close beside her head and just within the curtains was, as he first thought, a toad, but really the same fattish hand, the wrist resting on the pillow and the fingers extending towards her temple. Mr. Prosser, with a horrified jerk, pitched the ledger right at the curtains, behind which the owner of the hand might be supposed to stand. The hand was instantaneously and smoothly snatched away. The curtains made a great wave, and Mr. Prosser got round the bed in time to see the closet door, which was at the other side, pulled to by the same white, puffy hand, as he believed. He drew the door open with a fling and stared in. But the closet was empty, except for the clothes hanging from the pegs on the wall, and the dressing table and looking glass facing the windows. He shut it sharply and locked it, and felt for a minute, he says, as if he were like to lose his wits. Then, ringing at the bell, he brought the servants, and with much ado they recovered Mrs. Prosser from a sort of trance, in which, he says, from her looks, she seemed to have suffered the pains of death. And Aunt Rebecca adds, from what she told me of her visions with her own lips, he might have added, and of hell also. But the occurrence which seems to have determined the crisis was the strange sickness of their eldest child, a little boy aged between 2 and 3 years. He lay awake seemingly in paroxysms of terror, and the doctors who were called in set down the symptoms to incipient water on the brain. Mrs. Prosser used to sit up with the nurse by the nursery fire, much troubled in mind about the condition of her child. His bed was placed sideways along the wall, with its head against the door of a press or cupboard, which, however, did not shut quite close. There was a little valance about a foot deep round the top of the child's bed, and this descended within some 10 or 12 inches of the pillow on which it lay. They observed that the little creature was quieter whenever they took it up and held it in their laps. They had just replaced him, as he seemed to have grown quite sleepy and tranquil. But he was not 5 minutes in his bed when he began to scream in one of his frenzies of terror. At the same moment, the nurse, for the first time, detected, and Mrs. Prosser equally plainly saw, following the direction of her eyes, the real cause of the child's sufferings. Protruding through the aperture of the press and shrouded in the shade of the valance, they plainly saw the white, fat hand, palm downwards, presented towards the head of the child. The mother uttered a scream and snatched the child from his little bed, and she and the nurse ran down to the ladies' sleeping room, where Mr. Prosser was in bed, shutting the door as they entered. And they had hardly done so when a gentle tap came to it from the outside. There is a great deal more, but this will suffice. The singularity of the narrative seems to me to be this, that it describes the ghost of a hand, and no more. The person to whom that hand belonged never once appeared, nor was it a hand separated from a body, but only a hand, so manifested and introduced that its owner was always, by some crafty accident, hidden from view. In the year 1819, at a college breakfast, I met a Mr. Prosser, a thin, grey, but rather chatty old gentleman, with very white hair drawn back into a pigtail, and he told us all, with a concise particularity, a story of his cousin James Prosser, who, when an infant, had slept for some time in what his mother said was a haunted nursery, in an old house near Chapel Izard, and who, whenever he was ill, over-fatigued, or in any wise feverish, suffered all through his life as he had done from a time he could scarcely remember, from a vision of a certain gentleman, fat and pale, every curl of whose wig, every button and fold of whose laced clothes, and every feature and line of whose sensual, benignant, and unwholesome face was as minutely engraven upon his memory as the dress and lineaments of his own grandfather's portrait, which hung before him every day at breakfast, dinner, and supper. Mr. Prosser mentioned this as an instance of a curiously monotonous, individualized, and persistent nightmare, and hinted the extreme horror and anxiety with which his cousin, of whom he spoke in the past tense as poor Jemmy, was at any time induced to mention it.
Everybody dies, don't they? Everybody dies. Isn't that so?
You tried to get into the locked drawer today, didn't you?
How do they come back?
So that was The Ghost of a Hand by Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu, and it is actually excerpted from his novel The House by the Churchyard. and the novel was first published in 1863 by William Tinsley. And this story is often taken out of that and anthologized because it's a very good standalone tale, as I'm sure you will agree. When I was reading it, I was struck by how authentic it sounds. Now, I've got a book called Glimpses of the Supernatural by Reverend Frederick George Lee, and he collected so-called true ghost stories in a similar period to Lefanu there. And he's not the only one. I've got other books. I can't remember the names of the editors, but there was one by a Lord So-and-so's ghost book. Oh, I'm gonna have to Google that. I didn't Google it. I've actually got it on my computer. Lord Halifax's ghost book, 1936. That one came out. So, but the Reverend Frederick George Lee's collection is earlier. Why I mention this is it really struck me that Lefanu was an authentic, with the testimony of the great and the good, of the upper class people there. It was really rang true. Now, I think this is a tribute to Lefanu's ability as a writer, because if you think of his other works, such as Green Tea, or Carmilla, or Lady Crowell's Ghost, they're all so different in tone, or Laura Silverbell, which has the feel of a folk tale. Carmilla feels like it's earlier than Dracula, but it feels like a gothic novel. This feels like a real account. Madame Crowell's Ghost is written in Northern English dialect, and when I did that I was channeling my grandmother, trying to talk as much like she used to as possible. People didn't believe that anybody really talked like that. There were some comments saying that I'd made the accent up, but no, I hadn't. And Laura Silverbell set in Northumberland, and I say elsewhere that Lefanu seems to have had a lot of knowledge about how the people of the far north of England speak. But although an Irishman himself, so he himself was born on the 28th of August 1814 in Dublin into a literary family. His father, Thomas Philip Lefanu, was a Church of Ireland clergyman, so the Protestant church, the Ascendancy church, if you like, kind of associated with the British presence in Ireland, really. Although, of course, you know, they've been there a while, and Ireland's a complicated place about who feels Irish and who feels British, and points in between, and it shifts as well. I think a lot of the young Protestants now, I read this, are now considering themselves Irish, which was unheard of when I was young. Anyway, his mother was Emma Lucretia Dobbin, and she was a writer. The family moved to the Royal Hibernian Military School in Phoenix Park, where his father was chaplain, and later over to Abington in County Limerick. Lefanu educated himself using his father's library and began writing poetry at a young age. He attended Trinity College Dublin to study law, but chose to pursue journalism and literature instead. So you see that, in fact, they are Protestants and they're Huguenots. They were, and you know, the Huguenots were the Protestant refugees from Catholic France, because for many centuries, a number of centuries in Europe, the continent was riven between Catholics and Protestants, and who killed each other with depressing regularity. And so the French Protestants had to flee, really. I remember doing that in history. So the Lefanu's origins were in Normandy, in the city of Caen. I'm allowed to say that. I think that's how you say it. They were Huguenots, and in the 16th century Catholic France were persecuted. So the firm record is Michel Lefanu, who was in the University of Caen in 1536. Although drawn to poetry, which he composed fluently in French and Latin, he took to the law. Isn't this very similar to Joseph Sheridan? So Philip Lefanu came to London from Normandy as a young man and became the founder of the Irish Lefanus. Philippe's son William prospered as a banker and merchant, acting as a Dublin agent for many of the Huguenot settlers scattered over Ireland. Significantly, and of course the British were keen to settle Protestants in their Catholic possessions, so it was like, let's flip the card over. So the Huguenots, who were persecuted Protestants in France, in a Catholic country, were Catholicism was in power, were then shipped to the other side, where in Ireland, where the ascendant power was Protestant and kind of persecuting the Catholics in many ways. Well, yeah, it was illegal. Let's not get into that. But there were problems being a Catholic in British possessions, particularly in Ireland. So let's get back to Gwilym Lefanu. He was appointed trustee and actor for playwright Tom Sheridan when in 1764 debts incurred in various theatrical ventures in Dublin and London drove him to live in France. Tom Sheridan was soon back in London, assisting his famous younger son, Richard Brinsley Sheridan, in the management of the Drury Lane Theatre. So there's all this, and Lefanu, Joseph Sheridan Lefanu, worked in the theatre in Dublin as well. And I've said this before, one of his employees was Bram Stoker, who later was famously associated with the theatre in the Garrick, Garrick in England. Okay, I wandered a long way from this story. Maybe. Lefanu began his literary career in 1838 with contributions to the Dublin University magazine, including his first ghost story, The Ghost and the Bone Setter. He married Susan Bennett in 1844, with whom he had 4 children. He became a prominent figure in Irish journalism, and he owned several newspapers. Did he employ... I think it was in the theatre that he employed Stoker, but I don't have those details to hand now. You think I'd remember, wouldn't you? But I don't. He is best known for his gothic horror and mystery fiction, including Uncle Silas, Carmilla and the House by the Churchyard. M.R. James, a later generation, held that Joseph Sheridan Lefanu was absolutely in the first rank as a writer of ghost stories, and I think he is. I honestly think he is. Let's have a closer look at this story, The Ghost of a Hand. It's fundamentally a gothic ghost story. It explores the classic gothic themes of fear, the supernatural, and the boundaries between reality and unknown, with a little bit about madness. I mean, it's not explicit in this, but at one point the guy says he thought he was going to lose his wits, and there's an implication that Mrs. Prosser, her nerves are certainly strained. So the tiled house, it's the gothic haunted house. It sets the stage. It's with decay and isolation. Not sure that's true. The spectral hand embodies the supernatural, clearly a cold gothic theme, creating an eerie and mysterious presence. The constant knocking and unexplained disturbances heighten the sense of terror and suspense. And I think one of the key things is, with good ghost stories, is you raise a question and you don't answer it. So what does it want? What is the ghost? What is the... and I think if you explain too much, I've said this many times before, you make safe what is explained. It's as if, there's that awful, creepy, nasty thing come out of a tomb and it's it's just a vampire. We know what to do with vampires. Don't invite it in. Shoot it with a silver bullet. Oh, that's werewolves. But we know what to do with them. And as soon as we kind of get a take on it, then it's not as scary. And think of how in Kid coming back to this in Alien, when the monster in the first Alien film, the monster is wandering around in the spaceship and we don't see it. It is far scary, and then we see it and it's fairly scary, but it loses something. And I think the masters, certainly James himself, I keep coming back to this. What on earth is that thing in the mezzo tint? What on earth happens in the story of an appearance and a disappearance? What's going on with the linen stuff in "Oh Whistle and I'll Come to You"? And of course, again, and I would kind of say, we have Lefanu, next generation we have M.R. James, we have a lot of close runners up, and then I think we have Robert Aikman, and Aikman again doesn't spell things out, and it's just like out of joint, and I think it makes it scarier. And that is one of the issues about this hand. It's just so odd and weird. Funnily enough, I did a similar story. There's a couple of stories about things like this, isn't there? I don't know if you heard the story I did by Sabine Baring Gould, about the finger, a dead finger, where there's this finger wandering around. And then of course there's the W.F. Harvey story, The Beast with Five Fingers, which is also about a disembodied hand, which really, the first time I ever saw the movie, 1946 make of it, I was really scared. And then, a bit after that, when I was a bit older, I saw it and I thought it was actually really comic. But so there are a couple of stories about disembodied hands wandering around. There's probably a subgenre of the spectral hand. Okay, this is some of the notes I'd made, and I read these and I think, what were you thinking of? The spectral hand itself stands out as a significant symbol. I agree with myself so far. Its partial visibility represents the incomplete intrusion of the supernatural into the natural world, embodying the terror of the unknown. Well, the first bit is actually, I think, well, that's quite a clever thought, Tony. The second one is like, embodying the terror of the unknown, maybe. The hand, which is never fully seen, maintains an aura of mystery and menace, which is basically what I've been saying. Highlighting the character's fear of what lies beyond their understanding. And of course, this is, again, I keep coming to this, the way the human brain works. What we don't understand, we fill in. And it's always bad. So you're standing outside a darkened room, and you imagine what's in the darkened room. And in most parts, it's not good what you imagine. And you're a bit on edge, whereas it's probably just got a sofa in and some sticks of rock. And maybe a toothless granny. I've got a funny story to tell you. I don't know if I'm safe to do that these days, but I'll tell you anyway. When I was working, I had just joined this team, and a lady who I later worked for, a nurse manager, what you call her sister, she came up and she said, "Oh, I need a male nurse to come with me and administer an antipsychotic injection to somebody who didn't really want it." And they lived in this, I'm not kidding you, it was a medieval abbey. They're not there now. I'm hoping I don't let out of the bag where it is, because it's a very special place. It was a medieval abbey, and there are the ruins of the medieval ruins in the grounds, but then there'd been a massive Victorian mansion built there, fair enough, which then had fallen into some disrepair because I believe that there were absentee landlords and they lived away, and they hired this caretaker to come in, and he and his wife, and they had 2 children who'd been there for many years, and his wife died. I remember the first time I went in, they'd had the funeral for the wife in one of the big rooms, and it was in dilapidated state because there was holes in the ceiling, and they used to have these tin buckets collecting water, but there were these dried floral tributes still all around the room. They hadn't cleared them away, and they're just these dead flowers all around this massive hall. And there was a front door that you went up. There were various doors, but there was one up these stairs. That was the first time I went in, and the daughter was a fae kind of creature, and she'd be about in her 40s or 50s, and she would wander round the lanes at night in a silk scarf. And I remember the local GP who we had there said once she jumped out on him as he was driving past to say that he needed to come to see to her father, because her father sadly got dementia. So another time we were called to them. This is a long, complicated thing. We had to have the police, and we tried to get into the cellars, and they blockaded it against us. And we got in, and it was dark, and we were in this room with no lights. It's this massive mansion, and my colleague said there's somebody in that seat. It wasn't a rocking chair, and it was the dad, and they just left him sitting in the dark. I mean, she fed him, and he had a cold bowl of soup, but they were very eccentric. And the man who was schizophrenic, and not the dad, he had dementia. The daughter was just very strange. I don't think she had a notifiable mental illness. But the son, who I actually came to really like and get on really well with, but he was pretty mad, and he used to stalk around and wander around the corridors, and the top corridors didn't have carpets or anything. Just room after room after room was empty, and because he didn't want us to inject him, fair enough. Although he accepted it the first time. He would run around with a hammer, so we had to go in with the police because he barricaded the door and was threatening to stave our heads in with hammers. We only had one hammer, to be fair. So we tried to get in underneath and we had to abandon it because the police command said it was too dangerous. We were going through the cellars, and then we did get in, and there were no police with us at that time. There was just me and a social worker, and we found the dad in this room. We didn't find any of the other members of the family, and I was just so gothic. It was fantastic, but as I said, and I said too, I had some conscience issues here, because the issue was, the son was really desperately mentally ill, so we were going to treat him, and the idea. And I said to my social worker, we had this chat, what we're going to do is we're going to come in here, we're going to say they can't live like this. The state will say they can't live like this, so what we'll do, in their best interests, we will remove the father to a care home where he can be nursed properly for his dementia. We will remove the son to a psychiatric unit where he can be treated for his schizophrenia, and the daughter won't cope on her own, and the whole place will fall apart. And sure enough, that's pretty much what happened. The father went to a care home, they washed him, they cleaned him, they fed him, and he was dead within 3 months. And the son moved out, got him his own flat in the town. Was he happier? I mean, he wasn't less happy, but the family unit that had kind of existed inside, you wouldn't want to live like that, I'm sure. I certainly wouldn't want to live like that, because I don't know what they ate. There was no electricity a lot of the time. I'm not sure about the plumbing and the sanitation, but it was this massive Gothic mansion. But all the adventures I've had. But I did think we mean to do well, and we operated within the law. But I wonder, what would have happened if we hadn't intervened? Well, they would have become iller and iller, I suppose. But at one point, when we had the standoff, when he was barricaded in, all the police turned up, and we had ambulances, I swear, and because it was very boggy, because the road wasn't maintained, we had the mountain rescue in with kind of gear to help us get across, help the police get across. And it was all, in the end, that diffused, and he came out, and I remember sitting in the back of the ambulance with him, and there's this guy who everybody's thinking is really dangerous. And all he said to me was, you got a cigarette? And I said, no, I don't smoke, but I'll tell you what, I'll go and get you some. So I went and got him some, and we had this, he'd been to Canada, and we talked about Canada. Anyway, so that's a personal story. Now, there's many people hate those, but there's many people who love them. So I'm talking to the lovers, not the haters. What have I got to say about it? Yeah, no, I mean, I just think it was a really good story. I hope you enjoyed it. I've now finished the Roald Dahl, and I've got a box here of books to go to bookends to trade in. And what I do is, when I fill the boxes up, I take them down. I see Stephen there, and he says, well, I'll give you so much cash, so much credit. Credit's always more. And I know if I get the credit, I'm just going to buy more books, so that's what I do. And then I kind of have more books, and I have to fill more boxes, and so it goes on. But it's all right. It's a living. Well, it's not a living, but it's a hobby. Anyway, I hope you're all well. I'm actually pretty well. I've been... I decided as I'm getting on in years, I need to do something about my health. So there's this lad I went to see called Ryan. I was talking about him the other day, and I've had my first personal trainer session for me, a 63-year-old bloke. And so I ain't going to be a bodybuilder, but I enjoyed it. My arms didn't work properly. Trying to drive the car, and I'm thinking my arms are just so weak, I can't turn the steering wheel. But I did manage to do it. But so it's to stave off frailty, and you might say, accept your frailty. Stop being so fancy pants about it. But no, okay. So we need to maintain muscle mass and bone density. I tell you why this is prompted, because I saw how frail my mother became at the end, and how her mobility was almost non-existent, and how she was in pain from her arthritis. And I thought, you know what, I don't really want to be like that, so is there something we can do about it? So that's where I've been today. And then the printer broke, and then, oh dear, but and the sun comes and goes. But anyway, and then Sheila's going away this weekend to this festival, so I've got to get the tent and everything out for her. So that's what I'm going to do right now.
Stranger of the Night by Edgar Wallace. The little instrument on the table by the inspector's desk went tick-tock, then it stopped, as though considering how it should word the message it had to give. It was very still in the charge room, so still that the big clock above the fireplace was audible. That and the squeaky scratching of the inspector's quill pen as it moved slowly over the yellow paper on the desk before him were the only sounds in the room. Outside, it was raining softly. The streets were deserted, and the lines of lamps stretching east and west emphasized the loneliness. Tick-tock, said the instrument on the table excitedly. Tick-tock, tick-tock. The inspector's high stool creaked as he sat up, listening. There was a constable at the door, and he too heard the frantic call. "What's that, Gill?" demanded the inspector testily. The constable came into the charge room with heavy footsteps. Tickety-tickety-tock-tock, babbled the instrument, and the constable wrote the message. "All stations arrest and detain George Thomas on ticket of leave, age 35, height 5'8", complexion and hair dark, eyes brown, of gentlemanly appearance, suspected of being concerned in warehouse robbery. Walthamstow and Canning Town especially note this and acknowledge S.Y." "In the middle of the night?" exclaimed the inspector despairingly. "They call me up to tell me what I've told them hours and hours ago. What a system!" He nodded his head hopelessly. Outside, in the thin rain, a man was coming along the street, his hands deep in his pockets, his coat collar turned up, his head on his breast. He shuffled along, his boots squelching in the rain, and slackened his pace as he came up to the station. The policeman he expected to find at the door was absent. The man stood uneasily at the foot of the steps, set his teeth, and mounted slowly. He halted again in the passage out of which the charge room opened. "It's a rum thing about Thomas," said the inspector's voice. "I thought he was trying to go straight." "It's his wife, sir," said the constable, and there was a long silence broken by the loud ticking of the clock. "Then why did his wife give him away?" asked the inspector. "Did she, sir?" There was surprise in the constable's voice, but the man in the passage did not hear that. He was leaning against the painted wall, his hand at his throat, his thin, unshaven face a dirty white, his lips trembling. "She gave him away," said the inspector. He spoke with the deliberation of a man enjoying the sensation of dispensing exclusive news. "Know her?" "Slightly, sir," said the policeman's voice. "Handsome woman. She might have done better than Thomas." "I think she has," said the constable dryly, and they both laughed. "That's the reason, is it? Wants to put him under the screw? Well, I've heard of such cases." The man in the passage crept quietly out. He was shaking in every limb. He almost fell at the last step and clutched the railings that bordered the station house to keep himself erect. The rain was pouring down, but he did not notice it. He was hocked, paralyzed by his knowledge. He had broken into a warehouse because she had laughed to scorn his attempted reformation. He had tried to go straight, and she had made him go crooked. And then, when the job was done, with all the old cleverness so that he left no trace of his identity, she had gone straight away to the police and put him away. But that was nothing. Women had done such things before, out of jealousy, in a fit of insane anger at some slight, real or fancied. But she had done it deliberately, wickedly, because she loved some man better than she loved him. He was cool now, seeing things very clearly, and quickened his walk until he was stepping out briskly and lightly, holding his head erect, as he had in the days when he was a junior in a broker's office, and she had been a novel-reading Miss of Balham. The rain streamed down his face. The cuffs of his thin jacket clung to his wrists. His trousers were soaked from thigh to ankle. He knew a little shop off the commercial road where they sold cheese and butter and wood. He had purchased for a penny a morsel of bread and cheese. He remembered that the woman behind the counter had cut the cheese with a heavy knife, newly whetted and pointed.
He thought the matter out as he turned in the direction of the shop. Such knives are usually kept in a drawer next to the till, with the bacon saw and the milk tester, and the little rubber stamp which is used for branding margarine in accordance with the law. He knew the shop would be shuttered, the door locked, and he had no instrument to force an entrance. The kit was in the hands of the police. He had wondered how the Splits had found them. Now he knew. He gulped down a sob. Still, there must be a way. The knife was necessary. He was still weak from his last term of penal servitude. He couldn't kill her with his hands. She was so strong and beautiful. Oh, so beautiful. Thinking disconnectedly, he came to the shop. It stood in a little side street. There was one street lamp giving light to the thoroughfare. There was no sound but the dismal drip of rain. Nobody in sight. There was a skylight above the shuttered door. It was the only way. He saw that at once. Sometimes these are left unfastened. He stood on tiptoe and felt gingerly along the lower part of the sash. His fingers encountered something that lay on the edge, and his heart leapt. It was a key. He had guessed this to be a lock-up shop. He knew enough of the casual character of these little shopkeepers not to be surprised at the ease with which an entry might be effected. He slipped the key into the lock, turned it, and stepped in, closing the door behind him softly. The air of the shop was hot and stuffy, full of the pungent scent of foodstuffs, cheese and ham, and the resinous odour of firewood. He had matches in his pocket, but they were sodden and wouldn't strike. He fumbled round the shelves and came upon a packet. He struck a light, guarding the flame with his hand. The shop had been swept and made tidy for the night. The weights were neatly arranged on either side of the scales. There was a piece of muslin laid over the butter on the slat slab. On the counter, conspicuously displayed, was a note. It contained instructions, written in pencil in a large, uneducated hand. To Fred. He was to light the fire, put the kettle on, take in the milk and serve Mrs. Smith. Fred was the boy, the early comer in the morning, for whom the key had been placed. It was remarkable that he settled all these particulars to his own satisfaction. As lighting match after match, he sought the heavy knife with the sharp point and the newly whetted edge. He even felt a certain exultation in the ease in which he had gained admission to the shop, and had an insane desire to whistle and talk. He found the knife. It was under the counter, with a greatly scarred cutting board and a steel. He wrapped it up carefully in a sheet of newspaper, then remembered he was hungry. He broke off a wedge of cheese. There was no bread, but an open tin of children's biscuits was handy. With the food in his hand, with the knife in his pocket, he continued his exploration. Behind the shop was a little parlour. The door was unlocked, and he entered. He struck match after match, hesitated a moment, then lit the gas. It was a tiny room, cheaply but neatly furnished. There were china ornaments on the mantel shelf, a few cheap lithographs on the wall, and a loudly ticking clock. There was a clock at the police station. He made a grimace as though he were in pain, felt with his hand for the knife, and smiled. He sat at a little table in the middle of the room and ate the food mechanically, staring hard at the wall ahead of him. He had done everything for her. His first crime, the few sovereigns extracted from the cash box. She had inspired that. Her little follies, her little extravagances, her vanities, these had been at the bottom of every step he had taken. Staring blankly at the wall with wide-opened eyes, he traced his descent. There was a text on the wall. He had been staring at it all this time. An ill-printed text, black and gold, green and vivid crimson, sadly out of register, and bearing in the bottom left-hand corner the conspicuous confession that it was printed in Saxony. His thoughts were elaborate thoughts, but inclined to dive sideways into inconsequent bypaths. Insensibly, he had fixed his eyes on the text. in a subconscious attempt to concentrate his thoughts. One half of his brain pursued the deadly course of retrospection. The other half grappled half-heartedly with the words on the wall. He read only those that were in capital letters. Behold, Lamb, God, taketh away sin's world. 3 years penal servitude for burglary, 2 terms of 6 months for breaking and entering. She had been at his elbow. Years ago, he was a member of a church, sang in the choir, and religious matters had some significance to him. It is strange how such things drop away from a grown man, how the sweet bloom of faith is rubbed off. He married her at a registry office in Marylebone, and they went to Brighton for their honeymoon. She knew well enough that he couldn't afford to live as they were living. He had never dreamt that she guessed that he was robbing his employer, and when coolly and with some amusement she revealed her knowledge, he was shocked, stunned. Behold, Lamb. Might religion have helped him had he kept closer to its teaching? He wondered, slowly munching his biscuit and cheese, with his eyes on the garish text. He found some milk and drank it. Then he rose. Where he had sat were 2 little pools of water, one on the floor, the other on the table where his arm had rested. He turned out the light, walked softly through the shop, listened, and opened the door gently. There was no one in sight, and he stepped out, closing and locking the door behind him. He put the key on the ledge where he had found it, and went quickly to the main road, the heavy knife newly whetted and with a sharp point bumping against his thigh with every step he took. He had an uneasy feeling, and strove to analyze it down to a first cause. He decided it was the text, and smiled. Then of a sudden the smile froze on his lips. He was not alone. A man had come from the night, swiftly, silently, and walked with him, step for step. He stopped dead. His hand wandered down to the pocket where the knife lay. "What do you want?" he asked harshly. The other made no reply. His face was in the shadow. What clothes he wore, what manner of a man he was, Thomas could not say. Only that, standing there, he was tall, gracefully proportioned, easy of movement. There was a silence. Then, "Come," said the man from the night, and the burglar accompanied him without question. They walked in silence, and Thomas observed that the stranger moved in the direction he himself would have taken. "I shall give myself up afterwards," he said, speaking feverishly fast. "I will end all this. End it. End it." It did not strike him as curious that he should plunge into most secret depths, revealing the innermost thoughts of his heart. He accepted, without wonder, the conviction that the stranger knew all. "She led me down from step to step. Down, down," sobbed Thomas, as they walked side by side through the narrow streets that led to the river. "It used to worry me at first, but she strangled my conscience. She laughed at my fears. She's a devil, I tell you." "Other men have said the woman tempted me," said the stranger gently. "Yet a man has thought and will of his own." Thomas shook his head doggedly. "I had no will where she was," he said. "When I have killed her, I shall be a man again." He tapped his pocket. The knife was still there. "If we'd had children, it might have made a difference, but she hated children." "If you were free of her, you might be a man," said the stranger. His voice was sweet and deep and sad. "Yes," the other turned on him eagerly. "That's what I mean. She is in my way. If I kill her, I can start all over again, can't I? I could go back and face the world and say, I've killed the bad part of me. Give me another chance. Look." He fumbled in his pocket and brought forth the knife. The rain came pitter-patter on the paper wrapping, and his hand trembled in his excited eagerness to display the strong blade with the silvery edge and the needle-like point. I couldn't kill her with my hands, he said, breathing quickly, so I've got this knife. I feel I've got to do it, though I hate killing things. I once killed a rabbit when I was a kiddie, and it haunted me for days. If you were free of her, you might be a man, said the stranger again. Yes, yes, the thief nodded. That's what I say. I could go back to the old people. His voice broke. They don't know how far I've gone under. They turned corner after corner, crossing main thoroughfares, diving through alleys where costers' barrows were stacked, chained wheel to wheel, into mean streets and across patches of waste ground. Once, through a little passage, they came in sight of the river, saw 3 barges moored side by side, rising and falling softly with the tide. Out in mid-river, a steamer lay, 3 lights glimmering feebly. I shall go into the house from the back, Thomas said. There's nobody else in the house but an old woman, or there oughtn't to be. My wife sleeps in the front room. If you were free of her, you might be a man, said the stranger. Yes, yes, yes! The convict was impatient. I know that. When I'm free, he laughed happily. She dragged you down to the deeps, said the man of the night softly. Every step you took for good, she clogged and hindered. That's right. That's the truth, said the other. Yet you could never escape her. You were loyal and faithful and kind. God knows that's true, said the man, and wept. For better or worse, for richer or poorer, he said, and it seemed to him that the stranger was saying these words at the same time. At last they reached a street that was more dark, more wretched than any of its neighbours. The man stopped at a narrow passage which led to the back of the houses. I'm going in now, he said simply. You wait for me here, and when I come back, we'll start our new life all over again. I shall kill her quickly. The man of the night made no reply, and Thomas went through the passage, turned at right angles along a narrower strip of path between wooden fences, and so came to a rickety back gate. He opened it and went in. He was in a dirty little yard, littered with the jettison of a poor household. There was a tumble-down fowl run, and as he walked stealthily to the house, a cock crew loudly. The back room was empty, as he knew. He pushed up the window. It squeaked a little. He waited for the cock to crow again and mask the sound. Then he swung himself up to the windowsill and entered the room. The point of the knife cut through the thin clothing he wore, and he felt a sharp pain in his leg. He took the knife from his pocket and felt the edge. Then he became conscious of the fact that there was somebody in the room. He gripped the knife tightly and peered through the darkness. "Who's there?" he whispered. "It is I," said a voice he knew. The voice of the man of the night. How did you get in?" He was amazed and bewildered. "I came with you," said the voice. "Let us free ourselves of this woman. She dragged you down. She is the weed that chokes your soul." "Yes, yes," Thomas whispered, and reaching out, found the stranger's hand. Hand in hand they came to the woman's room. A cheap nightlight was burning on the mantel-shelf. She lay with one bare arm thrown out of bed. Her breast rose and fell regularly. He had seen something else that had risen and fallen monotonously. What was it? Yes, barges on the river. She was handsome in a coarse way, and as she slept she smiled. Some movement of the man disturbed her, for she stirred and murmured a name. It was not the name of him who stood above her, a knife in his shaking hand. "Do you love her?" The stranger's voice was very soft. The husband shook his head. "Once, I thought so. Now," he shook his head again. "Do you hate her?" The thief was looking at the sleeping woman earnestly. "I don't hate her," he said simply. "I served her because it was my duty." "Come," said the stranger, and they left the room together. Thomas unfastened the street door, and they passed again into the dreary night. "I don't love her. I don't hate her," he said again, half to himself. "I went to her because it was my duty. I worked and stole, and she betrayed me, so I thought I would kill her." The knife was still in his hand. In silence they traversed the way they came until they reached a little passage that led to the river. They turned into this. At the end of the passage was a flight of stone steps, and they heard the clug of water as it washed them. Thomas raised his hand and sent the knife spinning into the river, and a voice hailed him from the foot of the steps. "That you, Cole?" His heart almost stopped beating. The voice was hard and metallic. He blinked as though awakened from a sleep. "Is that you, Cole? Who is it?" Thomas saw a boat at the bottom of the steps. There were 4 men in it, and one was holding fast with a boat hook to an iron ring let into the stone. "Me," said the thief. "It ain't Cole," said another voice disgustedly. "Cole won't turn up, he's drunk." There was a whispering in the boat. Then an authoritative voice demanded, "Want a job, my lad?" Thomas went down 2 steps and bent forward. "Yeah, I want a job," he said. A querulous voice said something about missing the tide. "Can you cook?" "Yes, I can cook." He had been employed in this capacity in prison. "Jump in. Sign you on tomorrow. We're going to Valparaiso, steam. How'd that suit ya?" Thomas was silent. "I don't want to come back here," he said. "We'll get a better man for the return voyage. Jump in." He got into the boat awkwardly, and the officer at the stern gave an order. The boat pushed off, and then the thief remembered the man of the night. He could see him plainer than ever he had seen him before. He was a radiant figure standing on the dark edge of the water, his hand outstretched in farewell. Thomas saw the face, beautiful and benevolent. He saw the faint light seem to surround him. "Behold," muttered the man in the boat, "it's strange how that text—" "Goodbye. Goodbye, sir." "Who are you talking to, mate?" asked the sailor who was rowing. The man who was with me," said Thomas. "There weren't no man with ya," said the sailor scornfully. "You was by yourself."
Everybody dies, and everybody dies. Isn't that so?
You tried to get into the locked drawer today, didn't you?
How do the dead come back?
So that was The Stranger in the Night by Edgar Wallace. I think it also appears as the Man in the Night. If you remember in the story, he refers to him as the Man in the Night. So it's an alternative title. So as you well know, this is a part of the podcast where I discuss the story and the author, so I'm going to say something about Edgar Wallace first, who may be known to many of you. Richard Horatio Edgar Wallace, born 1875 and died in 1932, was a prolific British author, playwright and journalist, renowned for his contributions to the thriller genre. Born in Greenwich, London, Wallace's life began under challenging circumstances. He was the illegitimate son of actors Richard Horatio married Edgar and Mary Jane Polly Richard, and was fostered by the Freeman family shortly after his birth. So he didn't have the easiest start. So his early life was marked by poverty and hardship. He left school at the age of 12, I said that, and took on various odd jobs before joining the army at 21. That's quite a long time. His career as a writer began during his military service in South Africa, where he was inspired by the works of Rudyard Kipling. Wallace produced his first book of ballads, The Mission That Failed, in 1898. In 1899 he left the army and turned to full-time writing, becoming a war correspondent for Reuters and the Daily Mail during the Boer War. Wallace's writing career flourished, and he established his own publishing company called Tallis Press and published Four Just Men in 1905, which was a success. Although the venture was financially mismanaged, Wallace continued to write prolifically. His experiences in the Congo Free State, where he reported on Belgian atrocities, inspired his serialized stories, which were later collected in the best-selling Sanders of the River, 1911. I need to slow down talking. Funnily enough, there was a guy who said about one, I think, it's best played at 1.75 times, and then somebody else said, no, I have to played at 0.5. I'm like, yeah, I think I talk fast, actually. I've always been accused of that. From 1908 to 1932, Wallace's output was extraordinary. He wrote over 170 novels, 18 stage plays and 9 fine 7 short stories. His works were translated into 28 languages and adapted into more than 160 films. He's apparently big in Germany and Poland, or he was. He became known as King of Thrillers, and his rapid writing style and ability to produce multiple works. And apparently what he used to do was he had wax cylinders, and he would dictate onto wax cylinders and send them off to his secretaries. And apparently he hated revising, and he would just send it off once he'd dictated it to the publishers, and they would tidy it up, but they wouldn't do much editing. And I think when you read this, it was a really easy book to read, to narrate. The prose is very craftsmanlike. I'm not saying anything about it being literature and profound, although we can talk about that a bit later on, but certainly his writing style is very effective, I think. It was said by his publishers that a quarter of all the books read in early 20th century England were written by Wallace. So he was a journalist, he wrote screenplays, poetry, historical novels, non-fiction, 18 stage plays, 957 short stories and over 170 novels, as we've said. Of course, he is chiefly remembered today for his contribution to the screenplay for King Kong. Apparently in 1931, he was moved to Hollywood to work as a scriptwriter for RKO. He was involved in the early development of King Kong, but he died of diabetes-related complications in 1932. Now, it's very interesting because when he was narrating his stories, I was reading to his cylinders, he would lock himself in a room with lots and lots of sweet tea and cigarettes. That'll probably do it. So there we are. Despite he got married to his secretary, his first wife, they lost a child. He married his secretary in 1921 and he had a daughter with her. And despite his success, his extravagant lifestyle and gambling led to continual financial difficulties. So this particular story, Stranger in the Night, was published in 1910, and I got it from the great book of ghost stories, giant book of ghost stories edited by Richard Dolby, who was a fantastic editor in the 1980s. I mean, he had a huge output of any anthology, and then his wife took over. So a lot of ghost story anthologies from the 80s and 90s were edited by one or the other of these two, of the Dolbys. And they've got good taste, I think. I mean, particularly when they're putting together scores of stories. What we're going to say about this, so it starts off, and I'm sure you were thinking, he's got this mixed up, this is a detective story. This is one of the crime stories from his newfangled detective channel. But no. Although I probably could have got away with it putting on the classic detective podcast. If you haven't subscribed to that and you like detective stories, please do find it on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, wherever. I think the only place you can't get it is Audible, because they hate me and I hate them, so we don't speak. And you may know the reasons for that. Okay, it could have been a detective story. The descriptions were so real. The rain, the rainy streets, the little shop, him sitting in that room reading that biblical tract. Now, I don't know anything about Wallace's religion. I would imagine if he was conventional, it would have been... apparently his father, who he wasn't brought up with because he was illegitimate, was a Catholic, but... he may well, Wallace himself, I don't know, may have been kind of Protestant, Church of England, Episcopalian, as they say in America. Now, so the story goes, it is a morality tale, isn't it? And it's a Christian morality tale as well. So this is like the Book of Tobit, isn't it? As you know, the Book of Tobit is part of the Apocrypha, so it is included in Catholic and Orthodox Bibles, but not in Protestant Bibles. But in the story, Tobit is a righteous Israelite and his son Tobias, and Tobias has his journey during which he is accompanied by the angel Raphael, who appears in disguise as a man. So, and he gives guidance and protection to Tobias from dangers, including a fish demon, fair enough. And at the end, Raphael reveals his true identity as an angel sent by God and healed Tobias and his family. I wonder if Edgar Wallace was doing a straight lift of this story. I mean, it isn't just the same story, but it is this guy who has done everything for a woman who has scorned him, and he blames her for driving him into sin. I suppose we would call it sin. I mean, he doesn't specifically call it sin, but that's what it is, isn't it? And the angel actually says at one point, "Do you not have a mind of your own?" I paraphrased. And of course, that's right. And then he wouldn't be the first man drawn into sin by a woman. I guess he's referencing Eve there. But the point is this, it's just an excuse. You don't have to do these things. She wasn't even that impressed in the end. So I think he's kidding himself. And I think it's just him making excuses for his own behaviour. Who knows? Maybe he did want to impress her. But it was very foolish. And now he feels he is so humiliated by her turning him into the police and full of hate for her. And I suppose he feels he's not being appreciated for all his evil doing that he did in her name, apparently. So he thinks, well, I'm going to go and kill her. And he gets that description of how he gets the knife, I really like that, in that as a technique it kind of really emphasized it. He tells you where the knife is and he gives you step by step by step and all the little details. And very often, if you want to bring a reader into a story, you use specifics, very practical specific details that drops them into the scene, and I think he does that really well. And then he's walking along the street. So that's the first part of the story. And the second part of the story is walking along the street and this guy appears. And he kind of has an inkling about that this man is not just an ordinary man, because he immediately starts telling him all his troubles and what he's going to do. And the man doesn't try and stop him. And then when he gets in the window, another clue to the supernatural provenance of the stranger is that he's just in a room. And then they go and find the woman, and there she is with her coarse hands. She's handsome, but it's coarse. I wonder what she looked like. I'd like to see a picture of her, just to say, like, oh yeah, he's getting handsome but a bit coarse. And he talks about it's his duty. And then the angel basically says, and that I mean, it's not for me to tell Edgar Wallace what to do, but I thought he could have kind of emphasised that little change, because there's a complete pivot. The tide then goes out, doesn't it? Suddenly we pivot, and he's going to kill her, and then the angel says, "Come on, lad, come on." And off they go. And then he gets a job as a sailor, so he gets to escape. So in a sense, his good deed in not murdering her, or he's turned to the good in shunning his evil impulses, is rewarded by going away to sea to Valparaiso and escaping. It reminds me of a sea shanty, that. I won't sing it for you because I can't remember it, but I once used to run sea shanty festivals, that's a true thing, called the Songs of the Sea. At one point in my career, I did events, and one of ours, we did I maybe said before, we did a rum festival where we thought it was a great idea to give people free rum. Not a great idea, as the police told me afterwards. And then we did a matchmaking festival, whereby I really liked that, whereby you got fixed up with somebody, you just turned up and we would use our, but I am digressing now. But we also did a Songs of the Sea festival that had, there's a sea shanty about Valparaiso. So he goes to Valparaiso, and the man, actually, the captain says, "We'll get a better man on the way back." So all they wanted is somebody who could cook a bit, which luckily, as Wallace drops in, oh yes, so happened, he was a cook. I think it would have been neater if he could have just dropped that in at the very beginning, said at the very beginning, served time where he was employed as a cook, and then at the end it wouldn't have come so much as a it's not a Deus Ex Machina, but you know what I mean, it's like, oh, that's convenient, isn't it? Whereas if you said it at the beginning, the reader would have gone, ah, yes, of course. Rather than, ha, that's convenient. To go, ah, yes, of course. Anyway, so that's that. I enjoyed the story. I don't think it's a great piece of literature. It was a very well-written story. It was unusual as a ghost story. It's a supernatural story more than a ghost story. Clearly there's no ghost in it. But there's an angel in it. I believe it was an angel. And it's a moral story, and most stories are moral. Not a strictly ghost story. Often ghost stories are a wrong has been done, a sin has been committed, and the ghost is there to punish the sin and right wrongs, whereas this was more about a man making a moral choice with the aid. Of course, Sophocles, who I sometimes talk about, he had this good spirit, the daemon, as they called him. Just as a spirit, wasn't it? If you follow, what's his name, Pullman, and the dust business, all that stuff, his dark materials, they all have these animal daemons, but Socrates didn't have a visible animal daemon. But the reason he drank hemlock, apparently, was because his daemon told him. He was thinking about leaving Athens and escaping with his life, and the daemon said, no, you're going to drink it. So he always did what his daemon said. So it's a good spirit. It's like this idea of having a good and a bad spirit on each shoulder, and this was his conscience in a sense, but personified, and I think very with echoes of the Book of Tobit, and the angel Raphael. So I liked it. I spent a lot of time saying that I liked it. I did. What else do I need to say? So I'm going to just kind of ramble. This has been a funny journey for me. It'll be 5 years I've been doing this, which is extraordinary. In September, didn't even begin to think about doing it, and it's done really well. And you may know I had my Amazon, for some reason, decided that I breached copyright and blocked me and were not amenable to discussion. I hadn't. I had inadvertently, but the publisher contacted me, this story, and said, oh yeah, it's fine, just change it. And I went, yeah, of course I'll change it. But Amazon and Audible were like, no, you are banned forever, do not come to us. So I'm like, oh, get up yours, I said. What was the point of my little rant there? I just lost focus because of that. Oh yeah, so that taught me how uncertain and unreliable these streams of income are that you get from the internet. That was Audible doing that was a chunk of my income gone on a whim of theirs, and with no recourse other than me paying a very expensive lawyer to, and I'm talking, it was a chunk of my income. It was hundreds of pounds, but it wasn't, worth the thousands that they would charge me to even begin, and that's without winning. So my madness, and there is method, is to, I'm on YouTube, I'm on Patreon, so if you want to please become a patron, that really helps me. But I've got 3 channels now. I've got 4 actually. I've got Ghosts, which I've been doing for 5 years, Detectives, which I've been doing for 6 months, but as a podcast has overtaken Ghosts. Incredible. Just shows what an appetite there is for detective stories. And then I thought, well, what am I going to do for a 3rd one? And it's a process of throwing spaghetti at the wall and seeing what sticks. So I think I've got something that sticks, which is classic stories. So I thought about sci-fi, I thought about romance, and I felt my way in with those ones. But there is an appetite for literature, So I've just done a Virginia Woolf story and a Stefan Zweig story, and what's his name? That famous guy. Oh, come on. The Irish guy, wrote Finnegan's Wake. James Joyce, that's him. I did The Dead. And so I've done these, and there does appear to be an appetite. So if you listen to those, please, as well, if you want to. Maybe not your cup of tea. The other thing I've learned, if you hear a noise in the background, Callie asleep here. She's having dreams about something. And I may have to turn around and comfort her and take her little dog head in my hands and say, Callie, Callie, it's only a dream. And but back to what I was saying. So if you hear a noise, that's what it is. Or the jackdaws above. The scrap man has finished. I've had to change my days. I used to record during the day. Now I'm finished nursing. And the scrap man's very busy, and the park keepers keep cutting the grass. And the lads are going their motorbikes illegally on the park, and it's very loud. So it's in the evening now, and I've changed my life to make it easier to record. You may still hear things in the background. So it's been a funny old business. And what I was going to say was, I have been listened too much to negative comments. There are always people who don't like what you do. It's just inevitable. If you're a baker and you're the best baker in the world, and you make the best cakes in the world, and 1,000 people come in and 99 of them like your cakes, one of them is going to think your cake is rubbish, and they're going to tell you, or some of them may tell you, and that will hurt you, and you will listen to that. Funny enough, Sheila started doing sound baths there. She's got a crystal sound gong thingy doodads. They're very pleasant. I would like to record them actually, and she says she'll let me, but she hasn't so far. She's out at a fire ceremony thing for the solstice tonight, so I'm with the dogs at home. And she was saying when she does this, it's like you put yourself out there when you're performing. And I said, I know what it's like. And she gets these feedback forms, and I read through them, and she's uncertain whether they're, and they're really good. It's really good feedback. And there was one comment that said something about it was a bit quiet, I think, is that what they said. It was out of all of them, that's the one she listened to. And that's what we do, isn't it? When we get a little bit of criticism, that's what we listen to. So I have been guilty of giving too much heed to the naysayers. And if there are any naysayers listening now, I actually don't care what you think. Just go and listen to somebody else, because you're getting it for free, so hop off. And I will delete your comments, just so as you know. And if anybody sees any negative comments anywhere, I can't, just because who's it helping? So this is the new me, the new positive, tough me. If you're with me, you're with me. We are a tribe. If you're against me, leave. That's it. So that's new tough guy. That's it, tough guy. Anyway, thank you. I hope you like that one. Please do listen to my other channels if you want to. If you don't want to, that's fine. I'll better go and see how the dogs... There's one dog up here, Callie, and the other two downstairs, and they're quiet. They're probably asleep. They may be doing wicked things like chewing something, which I hope they've grown out of, but they don't seem to have. Anyway, that's what I'm off to do now, and wait for Sheila with a nice cup of tea to warm her up when she comes back from her solstice fire ceremony, which apparently is very cold, despite there being a fire. The Telephone by Mary Treadgold, narrated by Tony Walker. If you would catch the spleen and laugh yourself into stitches, follow me, I called to Sir Toby, and as I ran across the stage, caught the eye of the white-haired man in the VIP's row. The light from the stage streamed out over the darkened theatre. He was leaning forward, amused, laughing, and as Sir Toby chased after me, I laughed back. I had fallen in love with him at sight, there, from the middle of the stage of an end-of-term dramatic school performance of Twelfth Night. We met at the party after the show, and met again, and again. And then we began to meet in backstreet Soho restaurants, and then in my tiny London flat. I loved him desperately. I had never been in love before, and Alan had not been in love for over 30 years, not since he had married Catherine, he told me, in some queer little snowbound Canadian township. I never meant this to happen. I've never felt like this about any woman before. I don't understand myself, he said restlessly. All through that winter I clung to Alan. We kept the long, secret winter afternoons and evenings together. There was so much that he wanted to give me, the things that I wanted for myself more than wanted. I believed I must have. I want to give you kindness and shelter and love, he said. He and Catherine had had no children, but it couldn't go on like that. Every time he came to my flat, the conflict in him deepened. It was like the deepening rift splitting a tree trunk down to its roots. He would turn wearily towards me. How can I hurt her? He would ask me. Catherine and I, we've been together all these years, long before you were even born. Why, I knew her when she was a schoolgirl, a child. Look at what we've done together. Look at our work. I tried to understand, but I seemed to see only a grey, ghostly marriage, a kind of deadly, intellectual, middle-aged companionship stretching back down the years.
There was nothing there, I thought, that should be preserved. It would be so different for us, I thought, and I clung the more desperately. I can't live without you, I said, believing that I could not. Our dilemma, Alan's agony, was resolved by Catherine finding out. There was no drama, no scenes. During the next few months, I never knew what passed between them. I dared not ask. I felt like a child whose parents are gravely discussing in the next room portents beyond its comprehension. But presently, Catherine went unobtrusively back to Canada without Alan. Alan shut up the house in Hampstead and talked of selling it. We, neither of us, wanted to live there. Immediately after our marriage, we came up to this cottage in the Western Highlands, which we rented through an advertisement in the Times. That year, Scotland had one of its rare, perfect summers. We bathed and fished, and the long halcyon days passed over us with scarcely a break in the weather. I was blissfully happy. Free from the conflicts and indecisions of the past months, we turned again to each other, discovering new releases, a new and deepening absorption. Our cottage lay by the shore in a curve of the hills, and whenever I remember that summer, it seems as if the falling tides of the Atlantic were always in our ears, and as if the white sands were always warm under our bare feet. But again, it could not last. One scorching day in early September, I came round the cottage at lunchtime carrying a pot roast over to the table under our rowan tree. I found Alan sitting, staring down at an open airmail letter that the postman had just delivered. He looked up as I put the pot roast down. His face was dazed and his hands were shaking. "Catherine's dead," he said incredulously. "Dead? This letter's from her sister in Toronto. She says..." And he stared again at the letter as though they were lying words. "She says, heart failure." Very peacefully, she said. His eyes went past mine to the open sea. Then he got up and went into the house, while I stayed, plaiting the gingham cloth between my fingers. Once more, I felt like the child who had inadvertently witnessed a parent's distress. Shocked, yes, but horribly embarrassed. Then I followed Alan into the cottage, and I put my arms round him. All that day I watched over him in my heart as he moved about the place, but we did not mention Catherine, nor the next day, and although I waited for Alan to speak, her name never passed our lips during the next 3 weeks. 3 weeks later, to the day, among other letters forwarded from London by the post office, arrived the telephone bill for the Hampstead house, the second demand. We had forgotten about the first. "Damn," said Alan. We were once again eating our lunch in the garden. "Damn, I ought to have had the thing disconnected before we ever left London." I picked up the envelope and looked at the date of the forwarding. "They'll probably have cut you off themselves by now," I said. But Alan was already crossing the grass to collect the pudding from the kitchen oven. "Go in by the hall," I called after him. "You can find out if it's still connected by ringing the number. If you hear it ringing away at the London end, you'll know it's still on." And I lay back in my deck chair, staring up at the scarlet rowan berries against the sky, and thinking that Alan was beginning to hump his shoulders like an old man, and that his skin looked somehow as if the sea salt were drying it out. "Well," I said, "still connected?" Perhaps I invented the slight pause before Alan carefully set down the apple pie and replied, "Yes, still connected." That evening, I went up to bed alone because Alan said he wanted to trim the lamps in the kitchen. I was sitting in the window in the late Highland dusk, brushing my hair and looking out over the sea, when I heard a light tinkle in the hall below. I turned my head, but the house lay silent. I went over to the door. "Hampstead 96843? Alan's voice, low, strained, came up the stairs. There was a long silence, and then my heart turned over, for I heard his voice again, whispering, "Oh, my dear, my dear." But the words broke off, and from the dark well of the hall came a low sob. I suppose I moved, and the floorboard creaked, because I heard the receiver laid down, and I saw Alan's shadow move heavily across the wall at the foot of the stairs. We lay side by side that night, and we never spoke. But I know that it was before daybreak before Alan slept. During the next few days, I became terribly afraid. I began to watch over Alan with new eyes, those of a mother. For the first time I knew a quite different tenderness, one that nearly choked me with its burden of grief and fear for him as he moved about the cottage like a sleepwalker, trying pathetically to keep up appearances before me, his face, as it seemed, aging hourly in its weariness. I became frightened too, for myself. I kept telling myself that nothing had happened. But in the daytime, I avoided looking at the dead black telephone, inert on its old-fashioned stand in the hall. At night, I lay awake, trying not to picture that telephone wire running tautly underground away from our cottage, running steadily south, straight down through the border hills, down through England. During that week, I tried never to leave Alan's side, but once I had to go off unexpectedly to the village shop. When I returned, I had to pretend that I hadn't seen him through the half-open door, gently laying down the receiver. And twice more in the evening, and there must have been other times, when I was cooking our supper, he slipped out of the kitchen, and I heard that faint, solitary tinkle in the hall. I could have rung up the telephone people and begged them to cut off the Hampstead number. But with what excuse? I could have taken pliers and wrenched our own telephone out of its socket. I knew that nothing would be solved with pliers. But by the weekend, I did know what I could try to do, for sanity's sake, to prevent us from going down into the solitudes of our guilt. On Friday afternoon, after tea, my opportunity came. It was a glorious evening, golden with the sand blowing lightly along the shore and a racing tide. I persuaded Alan to take the boat out to troll for mackerel on the turn. I watched him go off from the doorway. I waited until I actually saw him push the boat off from our small jetty. Then I turned back into the cottage and closed the door behind me. I had shut out all the evening sunlight so that I could hardly see the telephone, but I walked over to it. I took it up in both my hands. I drew a long, deep breath, and I gave the Hampstead number. All that I had been told of Catherine during those bad months in London had been of kindness and gentleness and goodness, nothing of revenge. To this I clung, and upon it I was banking. My teeth were chattering, and I was shaking all over when the bell down in London began to ring. I suppose at that moment I lost my head. I thought, I could have sworn, I heard the receiver softly raised at the far end. But I suppose I should have waited instead of bursting into words. Now I shall never know. And they were not even the words I'd planned. I suppose I'd reverted, being so frightened, to the kind of prayer one blurts out in childhood. Please, please, I said down the mouthpiece, please let me have him now. I know everything I've done's been wrong. It's too late about that. But I won't be a child anymore. I'll look after him, like you've always done, I said. Only, please, let me have him now. I'll be a wife to him. I promise you, if that's what you're wanting. I can get him right again, and I'll take care of him, now and forevermore, I said. And I banged the receiver down and fled upstairs to our bedroom. Through the window, I could see the little boat bobbing about on the sea. I sat down in the window in the full evening sun, and I shook all over, and I cried and cried. In the small hours of the morning came the crisis. I woke, it must have been about 4:30. The bed was empty. In an instant I was wide awake because down in the hall I could hear the insistent tinkle of the telephone receiver struck over and over again, and above it, mingled with it, Alan's voice. Somehow I got the lamp lighted, the shadows tilted all over the ceiling, and I could hear the paraffin sloshing round the bowl as I stumbled out to the head of the stairs. Catherine! Catherine! He was shaking the receiver and babbling down the mouthpiece when my light from the staircase fell upon him. He let the receiver drop and stood, looking up at me. "I can't get her," he said. "I wanted her to forgive me, but she doesn't answer. I can't reach her." I brought him up the stairs. I can remember shivering with the little dawn sea wind blowing through my cotton nightdress from the open window. I made him tea, while he sat in the window staring up at the grey clouds of the morning. At last he said, "You must book yourself a room at one of the hotels in Oban, only for a couple of nights. I'll come back probably tomorrow or the next day. You see," and he began to explain carefully, politely, as if to a foreigner. "You see, I've got to find Catherine, and so I have to go down unexpectedly to London. From our remote part of the Highlands, there are only 2 trains a day. Alan went on the early morning one. I had, of course, no intention of going to any hotel. I knew where my promise to Catherine lay, where lay my love. I said yes, yes, to everything Alan said, and stayed in the cottage all that day. And then I caught the evening train. There was no chance of a sleeper. I huddled in the corner of a carriage packed with returning holidaymakers, my face turned first to the twilight, and then to the darkness rushing past the window. In the dead, cold hours, when the other passengers sprawled and snored, the terror for Alan nearly throttled me. Once I dozed off and woke, biting back a scream because I thought I saw the telephone wire running alongside the train, stretched and singing, "You'll never know, you'll never know." Euston in the morning loomed gaunt and monstrous. The London streets were dripping with autumn rain. I told the taxi-man to drive as fast as possible up to Hampstead. When he pulled up in Allen's Road before a gate set in a high wall, I was already half out of the taxi. I pushed the fare at him, slapped open the gate and ran up the short drive. I just had time to notice that the white Regency house was more or less what I had pictured before I was up the flight of steps and tugging at the iron bell cord. I was tired, deadly tired, deadly afraid. What courage I had ever had seemed to have fled. I promised, "Oh, if you've ever really been here, please, I'm gone." I gabbled while the London rain poured over me and the bell reverberated through the house. At last, I heard a movement inside the house, and then footsteps slowly drawing towards the door. For a second, Alan and I stood gazing at each other. Then, suddenly, I was over the threshold and in his arms, while the door swung gently to behind us. I drew him over to the staircase, drew him down, knelt beside him as he sat there on the second stair. He turned his face against my shoulder and heaved a sigh. After a little while, I raised my head and looked about me. We were in a large, white-panelled hall with a window through which I could see a plane tree, its quiet branches stroking the glass. The only thing in common with our hall up in Scotland was the telephone, standing on a mahogany table against the wall. For some moment I gazed at it. My terror was wholly gone, like a dream at morning. But I became aware of a new emotion, disquieting, faintly discreditable. I looked suspiciously down at Alan. I wanted to know. Cautiously, I began to frame my question. He was so still that I wondered if he had fallen asleep. But just then he stirred, and I took his head between my hands and, as he smiled at me, turned his face searchingly towards the light. It was calm, as though washed by tidal waters. I knew that I could never ask my question. At that moment, the front doorbell began to peal. We both jumped and got to our feet. "You go," said Alan, disappearing into the back of the house. The sharp-nosed young man in the dripping Macintosh was aggrieved. "Been sent to cut you off," he said. "Bill unpaid. Nothing done." I turned back into the hall. About me, above me, the house lay quiet. Only against the window, the boughs of the plane tree clamoured in a sudden flurry of wind and rain. The question I could never ask, the answer never to be given. Surely both were irrelevant. For all the tranquility of the house, I felt my panic begin again to stir. There was only one thing that mattered to me, to us. "Alan," I called, and I tried not to let my voice quaver. "It's about the telephone. Do you want it cut off?" I held my breath. The reply came immediately. "Why, darling, we're going back to Scotland tonight, out of this damnable climate. We don't want to pay for what we're not going to need anymore. Tell them they can disconnect it at once."
Everybody died, stand back. Everybody died. Isn't that so?
You tried to get into the locked drawer today, didn't you?
How do the dead come back?
So that was The Telephone by Mary Treadgold. And now we come to the part of the podcast where I discuss the story and I say something about the author and say something about the story and my response to it. If you are just wanting stories and no commentary, then you'll find on YouTube I have some extensive playlists and compilations, either in the Sleep Stories playlist or the full audiobook playlist, and there are many hours of stories chained together there that you don't have to listen to any commentaries if that's your particular bag. If you are interested in the commentary, and apparently some people are, let us go on. So, The Telephone by Mary Treadgold was first published in 1955 as part of the anthology The Third Ghost Book, edited by Lady Cynthia Asquith. So there are a whole bunch of these ghost books, and they're really quite rare now. Well, they're more expensive than they were, and I've got one or two, and they're kind of battered old 70s, well, these are not even 70s, 50s paperbacks, and they went on for a bit. So this story was later included in Roald Dahl's Book of Ghost Stories 1983, which has remained in print ever since. You may know it's my project to work through that book. There's a couple of reasons for that. The main reason is that I nearly have, and then once I've read all the stories, I'll be able to get rid of it and make a little tiny bit more space in order so I can buy a new book. I've got tons of anthologies of ghost stories, and of course many of the stories are repeated, but of course no anthology is exactly the same. So I'm working my way through the anthologies that I've made the biggest dent in to see if I can clear a bit of space. Roald Dahl famously, and I said this when I did this, I did the In the Tube, was it? By E.F. Benson, and I said that he had decided to approach somebody to make a TV series of ghost stories, and nothing but ghost stories. And he began in the 50s to read ghost stories, and he collected hundreds of them and read hundreds of them, and was astonished to find that most of them were rubbish in his opinion. So I think he ended up with 24 for the series, and this anthology, Roald Dahl's Book of Ghost Stories, came out in 1983, as I've just said, has the best of them. Now, I think I have... Now, it's very interesting. I like this story, The Telephone by Mary Treadgold. I just told you what it was, you just heard it. But I went on to Goodreads. Now, Goodreads is notoriously harsh, so you can find, Hemingway, or anybody you think's any good, or Edith Wharton, or William Shakespeare, or Charles Dickens, or
John Cheever or anybody, Neil Gaiman, anybody. I'm going to go through a list of all the authors that ever existed now. And they will have 3.5 stars out of 5 because somebody won't like them. And they will write very caustic reviews in many cases. So if you are a self-published author, as I was, then you find that they say, I think my books ended up as between 4.3 and 4.5. Some were 3 point something. But that wasn't bad, really. But they're awful on Goodreads. They're very... Amazon reviews tended to be kinder, but something about the people who go on Goodreads, I think they... And I've said this before, they think they're critics, and they think the role of the critic is to excoriate an author. They don't think that part of the role of the critic is to be helpful. I don't know, they've got this persona, or there is a persona of the critic that is an embittered person who just wants to pull authors down. And what they say is, of course, the critics are failed authors. That's what they say. I don't know. They say a lot of things, and we shouldn't always believe what they say. But in this case, I think they're probably right. I say this before. Stereophonics have a song called Mr. Writer, and it's a part. Kelly Jones had a music critic in this case, pull apart his stories, and he wrote this song about the critic, which isn't very kind in his wishes to the critic, but the critic deserved it, in my opinion. And I've got on to critics. Point was, Roald Dahl thought this was a good story. Goodreads don't think it's a good story. I think it's a good story. I'm with Roald Dahl, and what I was saying is I've come to kind of understand Roald Dahl's taste, and the whole point of me beginning to talk about Goodreads was to say that, some people like different things. Honestly, I know people who will say, Shakespeare, a lot of rubbish. Okay, and you are a what? Well, I'm a joiner. Right, okay. But I think he's rubbish, and I think Crossroads, that isn't on anymore, is a work of literature. Well, it's all about your taste, isn't it? Some people like some things, some people don't like other things, and I've come to the conclusion that actually, there was this idea, I was reading this article about the canon, and there's a guy called Leavis who set out and said, what is good literature? And the idea was, there are two views on this. One is, it's like I said, just your taste. And the other was, there's an objective standard of good literature. There is something that makes literature great. And I think this still floats around in the world of people, in the world, let's just say. And I actually think, but I think that some writers are better than others. Why do I think that? Do I say that's just my taste? Well, when I'm in a good mood, I say, yeah, it's just my taste. And I may think, looking at the shelf, Ray Bradbury, looking at his shelf there, he's a great writer. And I've done Ray Bradbury stories. I did The Crowd, and I've done The Witch Door, I've done various. And somebody will comment, yeah, that was rubbish, So I make my point. Is it taste? But some of me is saying, like Roald Dahl, yeah, no, some of this is better than others. So what is Roald Dahl like? Roald Dahl likes a bit of character development. When we get our pulp stories, I was reading an article which referenced Aristotle's Poetics. So Aristotle was this Greek dude, way back, man. And he had a lot of influence, a massive amount of influence on our civilization, on Western civilization. When I say our, I mean mine and some of the other people listening. And so he had a massive influence, and he said basically mythos is plot. Plot is what drives a story, number one. And he says character comes second. Now what we had in the 19th century and 20th century and early 20th century, really, early mid, was character is king. So when you look at the novels that the great and the good in their drinking clubs in Soho, I don't think they drink. I think they have lattes and macchiatos in cafes in Soho and go to the theatre. And I think that they love character. So to me, I think there are some great novels that are just about somebody having feelings. And feelings are great, like, if you can be bothered with that kind of thing. I personally think feelings are overrated. They just get you in trouble. Any feelings I've ever had have always caused me trouble. You think about it. Anger, pride, any of those things. Love and its corollary and its sequelae. So they just get you in trouble. So me, feelings, no. But I appreciate that people in Soho and that kind of class of people, they like books about feelings. Roald Dahl, he likes a plot, but he likes feelings as well. I don't mind character when it's funny. I've just been reading a fair bit of Agatha Christie recently and think she's really funny. And I may change my mind on Jane Austen. I remember having to read Jane Austen when I was doing English literature at school and finding it dreadfully dull. We did Emma. But I think I was a teenage boy at the time, and I was not disposed to, in a very working class community, and I was not disposed to thinking it was good. But now I think I probably would enjoy it a lot more. So I quite like a bit character with wit. Anyway, we've wandered a long way from Mary Threadgold, but maybe not as far as you think, because this story is about feelings. Roald likes that. And when and after all I said about feelings, I come to this story and think, oh yeah, it's good. Why was it good, Tony? I asked myself. Oh, well, there's two things. I'll tell you what I like. I'll tell you what I like about it. I like the settings. So I would love a house in Hampstead, like his house. And I would really like to stay the summer, but not the winter, in the West Highlands and a lovely cottage with a massive beach. All summer. As long as the weather's glorious, unlike this year, unlike last year, unlike the year before. No, the year before wasn't too bad, but I think we get a nice summer every 5 years or so. And it isn't this year. So, yeah, I like the setting. I really like the ghost over the telephone. There's something about ghosts over telephones that I really, really, really like. Or ghosts communicating. So I like that. That's just a kind of spooky, chilly, ooh thing. And I also like the exploration of love. That's a feeling, I know. I've just contradicted myself. But I do that all the time. So why should this be any different? So this man had an affair with a much younger woman. And they loved each other, there's no doubt about that. So he had a very companionable, long-standing relationship with a woman who he didn't have children with, but even so. And they were together and they did a lot of work and they were very happy, for many, many, many years. And he meets this much younger woman and there's no fool like an old fool. But let's not, there is no suggestion that their love of the young woman and the older dude, that there's anything other than lovey about it. That it's pure love, it's true love. And we know that true love is the most wonderful thing in the world because we heard it in The Princess Bride. Okay, fair enough. But there's guilt, isn't there? There's guilt, and the fact that you have both of those things at the same time. It would have been easy, it would have been cheap, in fact, to kind of besmirch one and just make guilt and make the true love, make her a silly little tart, or him a vacuous, empty-headed, lustful old goat. And then we could end the guilt with, it's one-dimensional in that case. But because it's served up to us with the love being actually pretty pure and the guilt being pretty pure as well, and because of that, what they say is when you're writing a story, always give your character a choice between two bad things. Not a good thing and a bad thing, because then they're just going to choose the good thing. That's easy. So what you need to do is one thing and another thing that are both bad, and they have to choose the least worst. And that makes for a good story. Whereas if it's just like the choices between staying in a burning building or leaving a burning building even, then that's not much of a choice. But if you make it like, who you're going to rescue, your ex-wife or your girlfriend, well, in this case, the ex-wife's dead. So I thought that was I liked that. I thought that was really nice. Let me tell you something about Mary Threadgold, because I've just skipped over her. She was born in 1910 and died in 2005, so she was a good age. She wrote both children's and adult book, and she was literary editor and a BBC producer. She was born in Muswell Hill, North London, the daughter of a stockbroker, and enjoyed a comfortable upbringing. She was educated at the Gina Mower, or Gina Moore, probably it's not, Mower is how I'd say it, but I'm a northerner, but I'm sure posh people say Gina Moore, the Gina Moore School of Dance and Drama, Challin's School, St Paul's Girls' School. Now, I knew a girl who went to St Paul's Girls' School. She was a girlfriend of a friend of mine, and she was lovely. And Bedford College, London, where she had an MA in English Literature. After university, she worked in publishing, becoming Heinemann's first children's editor before joining the BBC in 1940. She spent 20 years at the BBC, forming lasting friendships with figures like George Orwell and Una Martin, and then became a full-time writer. The Telephone, as I said, was in 1955. I'm drawn to compare the story with The Pomegranate Seed by Edith Wharton. I don't know if you know The Pomegranate Seed. In The Pomegranate Seed, there is no adultery. I think the wife dies and the younger woman comes along. But then he starts getting letters, not telephone calls, but letters. It's spooky, from his dead wife, his late wife. And he becomes incredibly preoccupied with her. Now, the difference in this is, in The Telephone, our man, our aged Lothario, he manages to have a happy ending because he manages to overcome the pull of the dead, his guilt, and he manages to move forward, and they start an idyllic life together in a cottage in Scotland. It might last, I don't know. I wouldn't have thought so, but not with that weather. But maybe if they got a dog, the dog would cement them together. Maybe they could have children, but he'd be a very old father. These are the things you think of. See, I treat them as if they're real people. That shows how good she is. Whereas in the Pomegranate Seed, it doesn't end so well. No spoilers. Go and listen to it. I've done it, of course. My method here is, in the madness, is to direct you to other stories that I've done and keep you within my web. It's evil. That sounds evil. Okay. So, and then the other one we have to think about is The Snow by Hugh Walpole. So The Snow is another case where the wife has died and the man is married to a younger woman. But in this case, the dead wife haunts. I can't give you any spoilers, but it's nasty. So this idea of, and remember, these are written, Hugh Walpole's a man, he was a gay man. Edith Wharton was a woman, and a straight woman, as far as I know, and old Mary Treadgold, I don't know about her. I don't know about that. So I'm now on ice now, thin ice. But she was certainly a woman. So it's not about. It's about. I think she's probably straight, but it's not about looking at the relationship from a man's point of view or a woman's point of view. But they all treat it differently. But this idea of the man and the younger woman and the ghost of the wife is a recurrent theme, and different writers treat it differently. Now, the other thing that struck me, I'd done a story called 3 Miles Up by Elizabeth Jane Howard, who was 13 years younger than Mary Treadgold, but from a similar kind of social and geographical setting. So they may have known each other, I don't know. It's quite possible that they knew each other. But what I want to say is that in that story, no spoilers, a woman appears and is treated by the men as a kind of, it's sort of anticipated that she will do the cooking and cleaning. And it struck me in this story, the Telephone, it almost unquestioned by the author, how the young woman, partner, lover, switches between being a lover and between being a carer or in a maternal role. And it struck me how in many relationships, traditional relationships, the wife also takes on some of the role of the mother. So she's looking after him, taking care of his health, and presumably cooking and cleaning for him as well. And I'm not making a feminist point. I'm not a feminist. I'm a man. How can I be? So, but what I'm saying is, it struck me that this is what she's doing here. That she is becomes his mother almost unthinkingly. She just becomes the mother, and that struck me as being of its time, certainly. So that's it, really. All I want to say is I liked the story. I thought it was good. It had to do with feelings. It had to do with guilt and relationships, and this and in a sense, I suppose, is the fact that the wife is dead in all three cases that I've talked about: the pomegranate seed, this one, the telephone, and the snow. Does that give her some power, or in fact are we just talking about, in general terms, about how people negotiate the guilt of leaving an established relationship? I don't know. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that. That's probably all I've got to say. Please stick around if you want to hear some more. I've got lots and lots of hours of stories for you to think about becoming a patron if you want them without ads. At www.patreon.com/Barcud, BARCUD, and I've got all the stories there which you can download, and we do a members only story every month. Now, people have said, oh, you can get them all for free. That isn't true. Not by me, you can't, and you can't. That's just a fact. You can maybe be able to find a version of somebody else doing it, but not by me anyway. Okay, I would love to see you on Patreon. If you can't do that, that's fine too. Hope you're all well. More stories to come. I just remembered something. I was going to tell you a story from my working life. Now, it went a bit like this. Many, many years ago, possibly about 16, 17 years ago, so the people involved are now dead. So I fear, and I'm not going to identify them anyway. What it was an old couple. And they'd been together for 50, 60 years, and they were in their 60s and 70s, late 70s I think they were. And then one particular night, it occurred to her that she wasn't really married to him at all, and never had been. So what she did was, they had a coal fire, she took her wedding ring off, and threw it in the fire, amongst the coals. This is a true story. And he was really dismayed. Now I should say something about him. They were a meek couple. When I saw them, he was a very gentle, retiring, defeated by life man, or defeated by this particular thing. He'd loved this woman all these years. I even want to say that they were childhood sweethearts, and they'd been together all the years and brought children up together, and now they were retired and approaching the end of their lives, and suddenly she decides not only does she not love him, she's never loved him, and she's not even married to him. And so, remember, I was a psychiatric nurse, and she was in fact became psychotic, and this belief was delusional. And she then believed that who she was married to was the owner of a coach company. So, charabangs, where they organised trips off, and this is what his company did. And they'd go off to Blackpool, and they'd go off to Edinburgh, and they'd go off to London or somewhere on a coach trip. And I think she'd been on a coach trip, and it occurred to her that this was her real husband, not the man she lived with. So she started basically going around this fella's house, the coach driver, the coach owner, and presenting herself as his wife. Of course we're married. Why do you say we're not married? And he, the coach owner, coach firm owner, was understandably disturbed by this and unnerved, as was his wife and his family. So she ended up being detained under the Mental Health Act because she had no insight that there was anything wrong with her, and so she wouldn't accept treatment. And so you can argue about the ethics of this. I used to do this for a living, argue about the ethics of it. But she was detained, and that means she was committed to a hospital, a psychiatric hospital, and not free to leave. And her husband would come in, and he was so upset, and he was a lovely old man, and he was so upset. And she was adamant she was not married to him, and he was not her husband. So let me tell you this. So I was given the job of escorting her to the public phone. She wanted to go and make a phone call. She was free to make a phone call. So this psychiatric unit was in a general hospital. It was a psychiatric ward attached to a general hospital. So we would go, and I would be her escort because she was not free to leave. And we would go to the bank of payphones that they had in those days. And I remember her ringing this number, and I'm standing, and not so, I didn't need to hear, but it was hard for me not to, so I was standing relatively close. And I saw that she pretended to ring a number, but she had a finger on it. And then she did this pretend talk. She was ringing the coach owner, her husband, but she did this awful susurrating talk that was like, she's talking to this nobody, but who knows what she thought she was doing. But there was just something about that talking, this insane conversation, and I don't mean insane in the sense it was full of nonsense, just because it was that whispering noise, there was something really unnerving about it, and I actually got frightened. And over the years, I've spent a lot of time with people who were psychotic, and I've never been frightened like that. I've been frightened sometimes they might try and kill me, but I've never, and they never did. I've been with people who told me to my face they wanted to kill somebody. I've even been with somebody on night shift who told me he was thinking of killing somebody. It could be that doctor outside, or it could be me. And I thought, well, anyway, we gave him some Valium and he was fine. But this particular woman, and then when she finished the call, which wasn't a real call, and she hadn't actually rung a number, so what was the level of her delusion? In any case, we went back and that was the end of it, but there was just something about that whispering and this look on her face when she was doing it, like a smile, but not a nice smile, like I want to say an evil smile, and I realise I'm projecting my feelings onto this poor sick woman. She became less mad, but she never ever accepted that she was married to that man again, which was really very sad for them. Anyway, there's a bit of truth for you. But there's something about that, and I think maybe that's why this idea of the conversation on the phone freaks me out. But there we are. Okay, that's life. Anyway, hope you enjoyed the story. Hope you didn't mind the anecdote too much. Speak to you soon. Where Angels Fear by Manly Wade Wellman. Recommended by Nancy Weitendorf. Half a mile from McCormack's cabin, a paved highway crossed the rutted woodland road, and here a post held aloft in the misty darkness an electric light. Muriel Fisher paused in its brightest glow and turned up her spectacled, good-humoured young face. "Let's interview that whiskey, Scotty," she said. McCormack smiled and drew the silver flask from under the tail of his old shooting coat. He was a tall, gaunt young man, made sturdy just now by rough, heavy clothes. Between his plaid scarf and the brim of his felt hat showed a fine, bony face, Gaelically wide in jaw and brow, with a narrowness through the cheeks. "Drink," he invited, and drew the stopper for her. She drank with honest heartiness. Her bandana-framed face, tilting back under the white light, seemed to have lost a touch of its healthy pink, but she looked ready enough in her tweed suit, turtleneck brown sweater, woolen stockings and Oxford. "That braces me to the adventure," she said, handing back the flask. "This is like the beginning of a Sherlock Holmes story. Old clothes, thick walking sticks, a bottle of liquor, and a dark road to travel." Her spectacles turned to scan the extension of the road on the other side of the pavement. It seemed suddenly to dwindle, to become no more than a trail in the deepening fog. Only, she added, Sherlock Holmes was too rational to believe in haunted houses. "His creator wasn't," said McCormack, and drank in turn. The potent whiskey cut from his mouth the savour of those sardines they had eaten together just before starting into the night. Conan Doyle believed in ghosts, fairies, and God. "What time is it, Muriel?"
She peeled down a knitted glove and looked at her wristwatch. 20 minutes after 11. We'd better hurry if we're going to reach this boogie bin of yours before midnight. They crossed the highway and plunged into the half-gloom beyond. Only a narrow strip of the sky hung between the two blocky masses of trees, and from it there filtered a slaty blue light. The moon would be full, or almost, but the holy mist clouds obscured it. Underfoot the going was uneven and turfy, and the tip of McCormack's walking stick sent a pebble scuttling. Muriel started violently, laughed to deprecate her own nervousness, and fumbled for a cigarette. McCormack found himself grateful for the brief flare of her match. "Tell me all about the house, Scotty," she begged. "It's a treasure trove of goblins, if it's authentic," he complied. "I've seen it only twice, and by daylight both times. It has the traditional look, all right. A big, square-roofed ruin, 2 stories high, on a rock above a stream. The local gossips tell me that it was built maybe 60 years ago by a young couple who were found one morning in an upstairs room, hanging by the necks." "Suicide?" asked Muriel, "or murder?" "Nobody's sure. After a while, some relatives moved in, a man with his wife and young son. During the first week, so I understand, the mother died suddenly and mysteriously, and the little boy was so scared by something that he had to be taken to hospital. Next morning, the father was dangling and dead in the same upstairs room. That was the last of regular residents at the place." Muriel drew up her shoulders. "I don't wonder. What about the poor little boy?" "He didn't entirely recover. The grocery man down at the village says he's at the state hospital. Mental case. Can't rightly remember who he is or how he got there. Quiet, harmless, but they don't dare leave as much as 3 feet of rope where he can get to it." "And nobody's lived in this house since?" prompted the girl. "Well, not lived in it," McCormack told her. "Once a convict escaped from the prison camp and ran away through the woods. That was a year before last. I was spending the summer at my cabin. The state police tracked him to the house and cut him down from the hook where he was hanging." "Ooh," gasped Muriel with shivery relish. "In the upstairs room?" "In the upstairs room." McCormack lighted his pipe. Its bowl sent forth a soft rose-coloured glimmer that relieved his strong, bony features with an impression of whimsical gentleness. The night was strangely still, except for the footfalls and respirations of man and woman. No insect chirped or creaked. The autumn leaves did not rustle on the branches. McCormack thought that cold perspiration was starting on his forehead, but perhaps it was the condensation of the mist. "I dare hope that nobody knows we're out ghost hunting," he remarked. "Some heavy-handed jokester might dress up in a sheet and come to call." "Have you brought any charms along?" his companion asked. "Wolfbane, a crucifix, a holy water, anything of that description?" McCormack shook his head. "I'm out to see ghosts, not drive them away," he replied, and smiled. He had an agreeable smile, though with his pipe fire half screened in ashes, his face looked like a clay mask in the blue dimness. Muriel Fisher felt less cheerful than she had at the beginning of the walk, and far less sceptical of ghosts than when she and McCormack had shared sandwiches and coffee in his snug cabin. That cabin seemed far away just now, but she refused to wish herself back. She had come out here expressly tonight to see a haunted house. "Where's the scene of all these gothic horrors?" she asked after a time. "Almost directly ahead," her companion informed her. "Yes, here's the creek, and the road ends. There was a bridge once, I dare say, but not now." The trees shrank away from this spot, and the fog-strained moonlight was almost strong around the two adventurers.
Before them, set deep between rocky banks, ran black, swift water. McCormack stepped cautiously to the very edge, peered down, and then across. It looked narrower by day, I must confess, he remarked. However, I think I can jump it. He flung his walking stick to the far bank, gathered his body suddenly, and straddled his long legs into a skipping leap. He seemed to swing across the stream, gained the rough-looking rocks beyond, and turned back. His thin face was like a genial skull in the moonlight. "If you go only a little way down, it's narrower," he called to Muriel, but she too flung her stick across. "Don't coddle me," she cried gaily. "I can jump as far as you can." She suited the action to the word, and bravely, but her stride could not match McCormack's, and her skirt hampered the scissory thrash of her legs. One blunt Oxford touched the edge of the far bank. Rock crunched and crumbled beneath it. She felt herself falling backward. McCormack, moving quickly for so big a man, shot out a hand and clutched her by the wrist. With a mighty heave, he fairly whipped her to safety. "Thanks, Scotty," she gasped, and straightened her spectacles, then the bandana that was bound over her head and beneath her chin, peasant style. "He spared me a cold bath." They both smiled and breathed deeply in mutual relief. "I take that escape as a good omen," she went on. "Now, is this the haunted house?" "It looks to be." They had come into a larger clearing, but here the mist had thickened to a pearly cloud. In its heart rose a great cliff-like structure with towering walls and a flat roof. The walls had weathered to a gloomy night grey, in which shuttered windows formed indistinct deviations. A porch had once run the entire width of the front, but the roof was collapsed, the pillars fallen, and the floor all but in ruins. "Isn't that a lightning-blasted oak in the front yard?" asked Muriel, pointing with her recovered stick. "I suppose owls hoot in its branches to foretell the death of the heir." "There aren't any heirs," McCormack reminded her. "All of them died or were hanged. Come round to the side. There's supposed to be an open window there." He led the way, up a rise in the overgrown yard and through thick-set brambles that may once have been a bank of roses. 3 windows were ranged in line on the right side of the house, and the rearmost showed blacker than its fellows. McCormack pushed close to it, knee-deep in rank shrubs that showed 1 or 2 wax-petaled flowers. "No shutters," he reported, "and the glass is all broken out of the sash. Where are you, Muriel?" "Right with you," came her reply from just behind his arm. He turned, set his hands to her waist, and lifted her lightly through the opening. "Ooh, it's dark," she cried in protest as her feet came to light on the dully echoing floor. At once she struck a match. It gave blotchy glimpses of a big, crumbling room, apparently running all the way from front to back of this part of the house. McCormack struggled in through the gap where the window had been. His bracing fingers found the wood spongily dry, as if the house had been decaying for 6 centuries instead of 60 years. "I brought no flashlight," he informed Muriel, "only a candle." "You did exactly right. Why chase away spirits with electricity?" She watched as he ignited the fat tallow cylinder, which yielded a clear, courageous tag of flame. "Now where?" she asked him. "There should be stairs leading upward," he said, and moved across the room. Its boards creaked and buckled under his shoes, and crumbs of plaster fallen from the shattered ceiling made harsh, crunching noises. The candle showed them a doorway, through which they walked together. Beyond, they found themselves in a central hall. Here was the flight of stairs they sought, its railings fallen away in a heap, and clotted blackness above. The plaster of the walls had broken away in sheets. Again they were aware of the presence in the house of decay's very soul. "Do we go up?" inquired Muriel, her voice automatically hushed. And McCormack nodded and again led the way. His left hand held the candle high, his right clutched his stick tightly, as though to be ready to strike a blow. He could not have told what he feared to meet. The upper landing was encircled with mouldy-looking doors, the two of them fallen from their hinges. McCormack went to each, Muriel close at his heels, and held in his candle for quick examination. He stopped at the right rear chamber, just above the window by which they had entered. "Here's our haunted room," he announced. "See the hooks there, on the wall at the back?" The hooks he mentioned were set well into the plaster, within inches of the ceiling. Strangely enough for that house of ruin and rot, they appeared to shine in the candlelight, as if new and rustless. Elsewhere clung a strange pall of gloom, though the flaked and ragged wallpaper must have been reasonably light in colour. "I wonder if a 100-watt lamp would help this room any," grunted the tall man. "He looks to be in mourning for the 4 who were hanged. But we'll douse the candle anyway, in a minute. Hold it, Muriel, while I spread something for us to sit down." From a big pocket of his shooting coat, he fished a folded newspaper, and spreading it out, covered a space against the wall directly beneath the hooks. "Now," he said, "light another cigarette if you like. I'll put a fresh fill in this pipe. Ready?" He took back the candle and blew it out, and they sat down in the dark. After a blinded moment, they saw that a dim radiance stole into the room. There must have been chinks in the window shutter somewhere, and the moon, now close to zenith, was fighting its way through the mist so as to peer in. The two ghost challengers sat shoulder to shoulder, each silently grateful for the touch of the other. Muriel again peered at the illuminated dial of her watch. "It lacks only 7 or 8 minutes of midnight," she announced in half a whisper. "Scotty, you're quite willing to stay?" "Strange as it may seem," returned McCormack, "I'm suddenly quite willing to depart. But I won't. I came here to see ghosts, if there are any, and I don't intend to leave so close to the proverbial witching hour." It was not much of a success as careless chatter. Silence fell again, and awkwardly. Muriel broke in a voice no louder than a sigh. "Look." They both saw, or thought they saw, a stir in the soft shimmer of gauzy light. It might have been streaks of silent rain falling, had the roof been open. Again, it might have been the rhythmic creeping of long spider legs without a tangible body. McCormack felt something fasten tightly upon his biceps and started violently. But it was Muriel's fingers, closing for comfort on his flesh. Her hand slid down into his own grasp. He too regained something of serenity and strength in being able to reassure her. "Scotty," she was breathing at his ear, "I wonder if there's something the matter with the doorway. Is it closing?" He stared. His eyes had grown more used to the almost darkness. "Not closing," he made easy-sounding reply. "The door's off the hinges. There, it leans against the wall, but the opening does look smaller somehow, growing narrower. And lower," she added. "It's only an optical illusion, of course," and she chuckled nervously. "But I'd bet good money that you'd have to stoop to get through it." Again, the illusion of bandy-leg lines stirring in the room, this time very near. McCormack at least fancied that he heard something like a stealthy scramble, and once again he lifted the stick that had never quitted his strong right hand. His left squeezed Muriel's wrist, trying to win back some of the calmness he had transmitted to her.
But when he tried to fix his eyes on the spidery movement, it seemed to fade, to retreat. He echoed in his heart the words of his companion. Optical illusion, of course. I'd have to stoop too, Muriel was telling him. It looks like the door to a dollhouse. Again her chuckle, more hysterical than before. Chin up, McCormack exhorted her. When we get up from here and walk toward it, there'll be width and height enough. Are you so anxious to see ghosts? Now, she fairly quavered. McCormack did not wish to heighten her terror by denying. He did not wish to tempt any strange and sudden visitation by agreeing. He therefore kept his peace and courted the floor and walls with his straining eyes. Once again, something rustled nearby, menacingly stealthy. He leaned hard against the wall and drew up his legs so that his feet would come under him and bring him, if necessary, swiftly erect. Too much imagination, he accused himself. This was undoubtedly the way that psychical investigators conditioned themselves to experience phenomena that never really happened. No wonder people had been frightened into hanging themselves on those hooks overhead. But he was too rational a being to be thus stampeded. Optical illusion, he insisted once again to his thundering heart. At most, none of the things he almost saw or heard would be too terrible to face. A blow of his stick. But what if it lashed out and met no substance? I keep thinking I hear voices, Muriel said once again. Not human voices. Not exactly. They're too soft and like whispers, McCormack suggested, as casually as he could manage. No, less audible than that. They're like an echo, a memory. They can be felt, not heard. Imagination, said McCormack rather rudely. His eyes sought the door again. There was no door. Only blank wall, solidly pale in the dimness. He felt a tightness on his heart and throat, and with real savagery tried to persuade himself that this was no more than curious, notable, absorbing. We shut in, Muriel said aloud, and the ring of apprehension in her voice made him jump. Next moment, a bell rang, clear and far away. Rang again, again, again. It's midnight, he said briskly, and with the greatest relief he had known in years. Hear that clock striking? Let's clear out. Let's head back to the cabin. He rose to his feet, feeling unaccountably light, as though he had floated up. Once more he led the way, trying to make out the vanished door through which they had come short minutes ago. Muriel's cry of agonized terror brought him short. Scotty, look back there, where we were sitting. What do you mean? He sprung round, still with that strange, airy lightness. Against the wall dangled two silent figures. Bands or nooses of rope held them by the necks to the gleaming hooks that jutted close to the ceiling. The figures hung limp, lank, unmistakably dead. One was long and thin in rough coat and trousers. The other, smaller and unmistakably feminine, wore a tweed suit and scuffed walking shoes. To McCormack, these two corpses looked vaguely familiar. Again, Muriel's fear-loud cry beside him. Scotty, I can't see you. Where have you gone? I'm right here, he said hoarsely, and turned in the direction of her wail. He could not see her either. He put out a hand to touch her. He could not see the hand. Immediately, he knew what man and woman were hanged on the wall of the haunted room.
Everybody does that. Isn't that so?
You tried to get into the locked drawer today, didn't you?
How do the men come back?
So that was Where Angels Fear by Manly Wade Wellman, apparently a very handsome man. And I want to thank Nancy. I said it as a German, Weitendorf, but she's American, so I honestly don't know how that might be said. But that doesn't detract any from my appreciation, because what happened was she's a great commenter on my work and really supportive, to the extent that she had a copy of a book, an anthology which I didn't have, called Hauntings, Tales of the Supernatural, edited by Henry Mazzeo, and it's a fantastic copy. It's an old copy. It's even got cut pages like in the good old days, where you had to get the book and cut the pages yourself. Published in by Doubleday and Company, Garden City, New York, in 1968. She posted this, shipped it, mailed it, whatever you want to call it, across the wide Atlantic, and it cost her $30 to do so. So I saw how much it cost, and when I've tried to send books the other way, I know books, for some reason they don't want us to send books to each other. I think it's they must have shares in PDFs or something. Anyway, let's say something about the story and about him himself. So it was first published in March 1939, Where Angels Fear by Manly Wade Wellman, and it's been anthologized because it is a scary story in various collections, including in the notable Hauntings, Tales of the Supernatural, edited by Henry Mazzeo and illustrated by Edward Gorey. That's the one I've got. Now, the illustrations are really cool. When you used to get books in the old days, they had black and white illustrations in, sketches. This one has, it's fantastic. So anyway, let's talk about Manly Wade Wellman, apparently very handsome. Born on May 21st, 1903 in Camundongo, Portuguese West Africa, now Angola. He was a prolific American writer renowned for his works in the genres of science fiction, fantasy and horror. I thought we'd done another Manly Wade Wellman, but when I looked, I couldn't find it in the contents. Let me just have a quick look on my computer in case I've recorded it and not actually posted it anywhere. Maybe I haven't, maybe I have. I bet you thought that I was going to be away for ages. I bet you thought, if you don't know much about computers, that there's big boxes of files and I was just going to have a rummage through those, and I was going to take ages to do it. But the one thing about technology is I was ages, but you don't know that because I cut it out. Anyway, back to the point. The point being the story. I was telling you about him. So his early years were marked by an international upbringing. His father, Frederick Creighton Wellman, was a medical officer in Africa, and young Manly spoke the local dialect before English. The Wellman family later moved to the United States, where Manly pursued his education, earning a BA in English from Wichita Municipal University, now Wichita State University, in 1926, and a Bachelor of Literature from Columbia University in 1927. Despite early discouragement from teachers regarding his writing, we've all been there, Wellman's determination led him to publish his first professional story in Weird Tales in 1927, marking the beginning of a long and distinguished career. This is a lesson, of course, a bit too late for me, but if you're just young listening to this, you know, your teachers and stuff tell you stuff, they don't know what they're talking about. They say it with great authority. You will be this, you will never amount to that, your strengths are in this. They actually have no idea. I was kicked out of French, for example, and I was told I have no facility with languages. And later, for a period of some years, I earned my living as a linguist. So, flippin' heck. Eh? They're no nout. Don't listen to them. Listen to me. Big yourself up. Get out there. Positive pants. And all those other tropes that you see on your Instagram feed. Yeah, they say positive pants. There's a picture of underpants usually. Anyway, how we got there, I don't know. Wellman's body of work spans multiple genres. See, I told you I was a linguist. Including detective fiction. It wasn't French though. Including detective fiction, westerns, and non-fiction. But he's best remembered. I did A-level French. He's best remembered for his contributions to supernatural and Appalachian folklore literature. I don't know if you ever do go on
and there's a young woman who lives in a holler in Appalachia, and she just speaks in this accent. She is so funny. She's got loads of followers and well deserved. She's just naturally funny. So I now know it's Appalachia. One would tend to say Appalachia. I think I've heard people say Appalachia, but Appalachia. Right back at you. He spent much of his life in North Carolina. This is Manly Wade Wellman, drawing inspiration from the region's rich cultural heritage. Wellman's most famous creation, John the Balladeer, a wandering minstrel battling supernatural evil with a silver-string guitar. It sounds fantastic. I haven't read any of those. Encapsulates his unique blend of folklore and fantasy. I should say I'm obsessed with Dungeons and Dragons at the moment. I've been playing on a Monday night with my daughter and her boyfriend, and so I'm like, everything. I'm writing a Dungeons and Dragons scenario, so that's going to be my new career. I know I'm 63, but come on, it's not too late. Never too late. Positive pants, come on. John the Balladeer, silver string guitar, get back to the point, encapsulates his unique blend of folklore and fantasy. Throughout his career, Wellman received numerous accolades, including the World Fantasy Award for Lifetime Achievement in 1980 and induction into the North Carolina Literary Hall of Fame. Not Flame, that's Dungeons and Dragons again. Hall of Fame, posthumously in 1996. So teachers, leave them kids alone. You don't know what you're talking about. If you're a good teacher listening to this, because there are good teachers. I had some great teachers. I had some rubbish ones as well, but I had some great ones who were fantastically inspiring to me going through life and were positive, apart from the fact I was really lazy and talked too much in class and got put in detention a lot. And yeah, but teachers, remember the power you have. I suppose you do. There's me telling my grandma to suck eggs. My grandma never sucked an egg. I never saw her suck an egg. She used to fry them, mainly fry them, not poach. She never sucked them. So I could possibly have told her how to suck an egg, because I don't think she knew. She didn't have her teeth. She had dentures, potentially. Anyway, sucking eggs and grandmas. Did your grandmother ever suck eggs? I don't think they really know how to do it. So Sheila's a grandma now. I'm going to go downstairs in a minute. I'm going to say, Sheila, I just want to ask you a technical question. As you're a grandma now, can you suck an egg? See what she says. She might surprise me. Anyway, that was a hymn, Where Angels Fear by Manly Wade Wellman. I think we've already made that point. It is a story that expertly crafts an atmosphere of dread and suspense. It does, making it deeply unsettling and genuinely scary. This is true. The fear begins with the setting itself. Bang on, gothic, decrepit haunted house. Yes, steeped in the dark history of suicides and mysterious deaths. That's a Tabasco sauce going on there. Wellman's vivid description of the decaying structure, he does do that, and its eerie, oppressive atmosphere. Yes, he does immediately immerse the reader in a world where danger lurks in every shadow. What he did really well was that he didn't write it in first person. It was third person, but he still led us. We were right there with them, weren't we? Walking through the wood, starting off cheerful with reference to a cosy cabin and sardines. That wouldn't have made me cheerful, man. But whiskey and sardines. It's not a diet to thrive upon. Well, apparently moderate drinking is good for you, and sardines are good for you. So maybe you could live on whiskey and sardines and eggs. Apparently, I was reading about a man who ate only eggs all his life. He was 96, had all his teeth. I made that last bit up because I don't remember if he had all his teeth, but I would imagine he would, because it's sugar that gets rid of your teeth, and there's no sugar in eggs. Yeah, I thought it was really good. Muriel Fisher and Scotty McCormack decide to confront the house's malevolent reputation. Yeah, they do, you see. And of course, remember I've said many, many times that in a horror story, which this is, there is usually a sin which is punished. Because remember, stories are moral engines. Their purpose is to get us to act according to the morality of our society. So a great sin is pride. Pride cometh before a fall. And that's exactly what this story is about. They were too fancy pants for their own good. They were too... And, you know, in a way, let's speculate on the relationship between these two. Do you think he's trying to impress Muriel? Do you think Scotty, who is he tremendously Handsome is Gaelically broad about the jaw and the forehead. I may be that myself. And one would be too modest to say that when one was young, it was commented that one was perhaps handsome. It's all gone now, though. I saw myself in a full-length mirror the other day and nearly jumped out my skin. I said, I don't know what that is, but it needs ironing. Anyway, horror. Back to horror. So the room shrinks. That's great because some horror stories are written. I don't think they're massively strong, but some people are scared by them. Basil Copper's The Spider, Arachnophobia, and the Margaretina Lasky's The Tower, which is Vertigo. And there are a couple like that build on specific phobias. There was one that somebody couldn't, it was a spider one they couldn't listen to. Rats as well. There's some of the rat stories that people can't listen to. So, he's building this specific phobia. And if you go on a creative, I remember going on a creative writing course years ago, and they said, yeah, use these classic phobias. The only trouble is if people aren't scared of them, it doesn't work. But I think this does work. When I was a little boy, I used to hide in a tiny cupboard. I used to do it to impress my grandmother, who was not sucking eggs at the time, but she had a tin. I've maybe said this before. It was an old biscuit tin, full of buttons. And I have said it before because somebody commented this was really common. And I would sneak into this and play with the buttons, even when I was actually too big and I struggled to get out of it. But so I'm not actually claustrophobic, I suppose. That's the point of that story. So I should have said at the very beginning, spoilers. Some people are prissy, aren't they? Prissy. I understand you don't want to. I've never been bothered by spoilers, really, but some people comment quite brusquely. If somebody has made a comment on the podcast and it lets the cat out of the bag, as it were, some people are quite forthright and blunt in their tone, calling them, in fact, jerks, which I believe is a North American term of disapprobation. I say North American. I'm actually, on reflection, I'm not sure if the term is current in Canada or whether they have their own, as we do. We have all sorts of words that mean the same thing, but come from different sources, and the Canadians may have their own term. So I don't want to be too broad brush with that. So anyway, I've been a bit mad today. Not insane mad, just silly and skippy in my brain. But again, if you've got this far, and this isn't the first of my so-called monologues which in fact is that what they are, isn't it funny how we say so-called and we call it into doubt? So-called professor. You mean he's not really a professor? Whereas Russians, I remember coming across this, Russians learned English. So-called just means it is thus called. So-called professor means he is called a professor because he is a professor, whereas in English it means, I'll tell you another funny story. Talking about linguistics, and then I'm going to finish. A number of languages use a double negative. The ones I can think of are French, of course, n'est-ce pas. You use both the ne and the pas. In Welsh, it's dydw I ddim, not nid ydw I ddim. You use it twice. In Afrikaans, it is extermini met jou saam nie. So again, you use ni twice. You don't in Dutch, though, apparently, from what my Dutch I learned. And so a number of languages will use a double negative to reinforce a negative. And I remember there was a class being taught and the professor made this point. And he said, interestingly, there is no case of a language that uses two positives to make a negative, all right? And then one of the students went, yeah, right. It was funny, wasn't it? Well, I thought it was funny. Anyway, this is about time I was off before I descend into madness. Somebody said, another comment I had was, this made me laugh. Somebody put, Tony Walker, he was brilliant in the beginning, but now he's gone off his rocker. As if. So tomorrow we're going to Morecambe, and
if you've got this far, you're one of those people who likes to hear these little anecdotes, personal anecdotes. So Sheila's doing a crystal fire healing Reiki thing at 7 o'clock. So she said, we'll go to Morecambe and we'll walk to Heysham. Now, Heysham, there's St Patrick's Chapel, he's in Lancashire, and it's got these rock-cut tombs that of a St Patrick's Chapel which overlooks the Irish Sea, and whether it was an Irish monastic settlement, but it's a splendid place, a lovely little village, Heysham. There's nice cafes there as well. She said we'll walk from Morecambe. Now, I like Morecambe. Morecambe's a bit like a down-at-heel seaside town, but I just really like it. And I like going to the bookshop there, which I think is a Pier Bookshop, the Pier Bookshop. And anyway, I said, what time's this thing you go on? She said, 7 o'clock. I said, what am I going to do? Taking the dogs, 3 dogs in the car. She said, well, you can go to the pub. I said, I can't really go to the pub with 3 dogs. I said, what I can do is sit in the back. I'm not going to be driving back. I can sit in the back with the dogs drinking cans. That's not a good look, is it? Drinking cans of beer, sitting in the back with the dogs, back of the car with the dogs. But that's probably what's going to happen. And then on Saturday, we're going to Ambleside. We're going to Appleby to a market. It so happened we were out some months ago, and she was like, oh, that's a nice Buddha. I said, look, man, we've got enough Buddhas in the house. She just buys Buddhas. And, we've got Buddhas. Why? We need something else, don't we? And there's a helicopter flying overhead. It would be one of those, somebody's fallen off a mountain helicopters, which is very sad, and I hope they get them to the hospital really quickly. We'll let them go by. I mean, I could stop this, couldn't I? But I'm just doing it for atmosphere, allowing me to slow down, collect my thoughts. So anyway, she said, okay, there's a green man, that carving of the guy made of leaves and trees and things. And I said, yeah, okay, we'll go there. And she said, so we've got to go to the market. She said, the green man is the guy who sells it's a hippie. I went, yeah, really? He lives in a van. Yeah, I'm not actually surprised. I don't know whether she thought I was going to be surprised. I'm going, yeah, of course he does. And she showed me a picture of him, and he had like them baggy trousers and sandals and a big long beard. And I thought, yeah, I'm not surprised. He makes green men for a living. Of course he looks like that. I don't know what I should look like. Anyway, that's going to be Saturday. And then Sunday, I'm going down to Loweswater in the Lake District to see my daughters because it's Father's Day. And we're going to have a little bit of a walk. I'm not taking my dogs because Catherine's got her dog Cosmo, who's a spaniel. And Jasper and Cosmo are kind of teenage boys, and they can be all right, and sometimes they can be all testosterone driven. So I thought it's just easier, and also, just easier. I'll go down and I'll have a walk around with my 2 lovely girls and Cosmo, and then we're going for a meal at the Kirkstyle Inn, which Catherine has booked. So that's good. It's a lovely. If you ever need a Lakeland Inn, I mean there are a few of them, but a lot of them have been modernised to be kind of modern. Whereas what I want is old-fashioned, Dickensian. I'm not saying they are Dickensian, but with the feel of the old country Lake District thing, and the Kirkstyle really preserves it, I think. Another one is the Pheasant Back Bar at Bassenthwaite, and there are others, but some of you may know them. Anyway, so that's my weekend. I'm going to be very, very busy. I'll be very tired on Monday because I'm getting on a bit now. Anyway, there's a scrap man. I don't know if you can hear that. We've had the helicopter, the scrap man. If I'm recording a story, I have to stop when they do this. That's why it takes me ages. Also, I make lots of mistakes. Okay, I think I'm going to wind down a little bit now. Good night, everybody, or good day, wherever you are.